Chapter 76, Casa City. These things seemed like a lot, but there was little money in most of it. The highest yield crops were corn and oil fruits, but nobody wanted to buy corn, and oil fruits weren't worth a lot. The eggplants and cabbages were planted by Zhao so that he could make a lot of different dishes, but he feared that no one on the continent would buy them, meaning no money. The only thing he had that was worth a good price were the radishes. Right now his space only had 600 gold coins, but that wasn't enough for the future development of the Buddha clan, so he could only rely on these radishes. As for the corn, Zhao was ready to harvest all of his corn tomorrow, then maybe he could plant some broccoli, though the amount of broccoli seeds he had was only enough for 2 acres. Maybe he could just use the other 2 acres to grow wheat, since he had wheat seeds in his barn. Right now the kinds of seeds he had on hand was too little. When he was on the road, Zhao didn't collect any seeds of other plants, because people had been staring at him. If he collected any seeds, it would make the people look at him strangely, so Zhao didn't fool around. Also, Zhao had thought, even if he collected seeds, he alone wouldn't be able to get enough. Even if he was more powerful, how many seeds could he actually collect? It was too uneconomical. Instead, after he makes money and some preparations, he could just put out a task for mercenaries and adventurers to do it. In this world, as long as you had money, you could make mercenaries and adventurers do any task that you requested. Even if you asked for the king of the Ixu Empire to be assassinated, there would be people who would take care of it, if you could afford it. Zhao, while sitting in the spa pool, was brooding over these things. But right now he had too little money available, and his enemies were too strong, so Zhao decided to maintain his customary low-key style. Suddenly, Zhao was hit by a feeling of tiredness. He shook his head. After soaking in the spa, he actually felt faint. Standing up, he picked up a towel and dried his body. Then he went into his bedroom where there was a pot of tea. Pouring himself a cup, he sat on the bed and quietly drank it. Zhao's body felt weak. He knew that he had been in the hot spa too long. He had been living with too much pressure lately, so he wanted to be lazy for a while. Lying there quietly in the spa had felt nice. But now it was time for bed. Calming his emotions, Zhao decided to get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow, they will be going to Casa City. He really wanted to see why it was known as the Pearl of the Northern parts of Ixu Empire. This was going to be Zhao's first time going into one of the big cities. He really did have some expectations. Although Adam had lived in the capital, which was the largest and most prosperous city in the Ixu Empire, for Zhao, those memories were like watching a movie in his head. It didn't feel real. That was why he was looking forward to going to Casa City. The night passed without words. The slaves were sleeping peacefully outside the space, in the open air. The next morning, everyone woke up in high spirits. Most of the rooms had a spa, so the slaves were able to take a nice bath. After breakfast, the slaves went into the space again to learn to read and write words. Then Zhao got into his undead and moved straight towards Casa City. From here to there, if they were riding by carriage, it would be 2 days away, but Zhao was riding inside an undead. Compared to horses, its speed wasn't that bad, and since it leveled up, it was even faster. Also, horses would eventually become tired, while his undead just kept on going. Now it only took a little over half a day before Zhao made it to Casa City. Because of the few mountains around the city, its walls weren't traditionally square-shaped, but circular. The walls were nearly 30 meters high with 6 meters of thickness, and it had 18 gates. Stuck to the wall was the flag of the Persal clan, looking majestic. From time to time, teams of soldiers would patrol the walls, heroic-looking in their silver armors while holding shining weapons. Everything showed that this was an extraordinary place. Zhao was standing beneath the walls, looking straight up. He had never seen walls like these before, because in his past life he had only lived in a modern city. Looking at these imposing walls, he couldn't help but think of those ancient Chinese cities. You could definitely count on these walls to stop the momentum of any army. Zhao could only marvel at them. By now, Zhao had already returned his undead into the space. The general rule of big cities, like Casa City, was that there was a warning area about 500 meters away from the walls. If you weren't someone malicious, Then it was best to put your summons away, otherwise the defenders of the city would be likely to count you as malicious and then attack you. Zhao didn't know this, but Green did. About 5 meters away from Kosa City, he made Zhao put away his undead. Although they wanted people's attention on them, that didn't mean that they wanted to stir up trouble. As long as they maintained a high profile, there was no need to cause trouble, and if they fight, it might expose their secrets. Green didn't understand why Zhao had stopped and stared up at the city walls. Such an action could easily lead to suspicion. If it weren't for those defenders seeing that he was a mage, Green feared that they would have already been questioned. Fortunately, Zhao only looked for a moment, then recovered. He walked towards the city, followed by Green and Meg. Mrin didn't go with them because Zhao didn't want the people to know the full extent of their power. Zhao waved and walked towards the gate. In front of the gate were 2 big boxes, which had one word written on it: tax. It appeared to be boxes designed to collect taxes. If the people wanted to go through the gates, they had to put money into the box, or they will be stopped. However, Zhao didn't have to pay the tax. He remembered what Green had told him, that mages could live tax-free. Of course, it didn't mean that wearing a mage's robe would make you exempt. If you wanted to live tax-free, you had to go register at the Mage Association and get a badge. No badge, no exceptions. But Zhao was an exception. Although he didn't have a mage's badge, the defenders had already seen him put away his undead. This indicated his identity as a mage, so those defenders didn't dare block him. There were a lot of black mages on the continent that didn't register with the Mage Association. Except for places like Montenegro Fortress, no one would dare pretend to be a black mage. Once they got closer to the gate, Green again reminded Zhao of what to do, because he feared that if Zhao's performance as a black mage was too moderate, then it might arouse suspicions. Chapter 77, Mage Association. The 3 slowly walked towards the city, and sure enough, not only did the defenders of the city not stop them, they even formed a ceremonial line, allowing Zhao to go through. In this world, as long as you had strength, you were respected. They entered the gate, and were hit by a confusing scene. The road was nearly a meter wide, with pedestrians coming and going like flies. Along the roadside were some stalls and shops. Apparently, there wasn't any urban management here. Everyone was crying out, and from time to time the pedestrians would stop and buy something from them. It was extremely lively. The people on the street were divided into several kinds. Some were just ordinary people dressed in linen, while others wore leather helmets and the clothes of a warrior. But there was hardly anybody wearing mage robes walking in the street. Just then, a voice called out, "Dear mage, would you like to hire my carriage? It's very comfortable and cheap. I grew up in Kosa City, so I know every single street. I can send you anywhere you want to go." Zhao looked around and spotted a coachman sitting on a parked carriage. The carriage was pulled by a big red horse, while its wagon was painted black with a beautiful pattern. Zhao didn't know what the horse was, but Green recognized it. Although the horse looked good, it was just an ordinary spirit beast. It definitely didn't match with Zhao's identity. But even if it didn't match, they had just arrived at Kosa City and were still unfamiliar with it. Plus they didn't have that much money, so they naturally couldn't buy their own carriage. And in this city, it was impossible to freely use magic to summon, so he couldn't just call out his undead. The only way they could find their way around was to hire a carriage. Green went to the driver and asked, "What's your name, and how much would it cost to hire you for a day?" The driver didn't think that things would go so smoothly. You know, mages weren't generally short on money, so they would rarely hire a common carriage. He didn't even expect that they would ask him for the price. The driver quickly answered, "Dear mage, my carriage is very cheap. Only 1 silver per day, and my name is Rocky." Green threw out a silver coin and said, "I'll hire you for a day." Then he turned around and spoke to Zhao. "Master, please get on." Zhao nodded. He got on, followed by Meg. The carriage's wagon was very large, able to fit 6 people. But Green didn't get in the wagon, and instead sat next to Rocky. "Send us to the Mage Association," Green said. The Mage Association was an organization of the continent, with each empire having their own independent association. The Mage Association was specifically set up to serve mages, and not to manage them. In an empire, a mage had equal status to the nobility, so the association didn't dare to manage them, and would only provide necessary services. Every mage that was registered with the Mage Association would get 10 gold coins per month in subsidies, but of course, few mages cared about that small amount of money. However, registering with the association provided a lot of other benefits. For example, a mage badge would make you exempt from a lot of things that were imposed on others. Registering as a mage in the association was easy since their policy was very liberal. There was nothing like a test. All you had to do was show off your magic to prove that you were a mage, then you can register with the Mage Association. Of course, mages going through the registration would be graded with different levels. If you just show off a little magic, you could only register as a mage of the lowest level. That would mean that the only benefits you could get were 10 gold coins per month and living tax-free. But if you showed that your strength was at a high level, you would get more services and benefits. For example, if Zhao had an advanced mage badge, then when he got to the city gate, the association would immediately send a carriage to pick them up. Everything would be arranged for them, their living expenses would be reimbursed, and they would get a monthly allowance ranging between 100 and 1,000 gold coins. Of course, to get this badge, you would need to have enough strength that was at least at the 6th level. One of the reasons Green came to this city was for Zhao to get a mage badge. It would give them a lot of conveniences. When Green told Rocky to go to the Mage Association, he saluted and drove his carriage straight towards the association. The Mage Association was a very special presence in the empire. They directly got their funding from state finance, specifically to provide services for mages. In the empire, mages were a very popular career. Even if you were just a stage magician, there would be a lot of people lining up to get on your good side. The only possible exception were the black mages, because black mages were very weird. Those among the aristocracy didn't want to meet them. Only a few businessmen might visit a black mage. So most black mages usually become mercenaries or risk takers, since they were still very popular among mercenaries. Compared to other types of mages, the life of a black mage was the most difficult. Other mages were treated as nobles, while black mages were more like commoners. There were many black mages that would only be issued 10 gold coins a month by the Mage Association. You know, learning magic was very costly. You had to buy magic materials and wands, as well as have enough money to eat and drink. Everything was going to cost you. The Mage Association in Casa City was very impressive. It was a 3-story building with an area of 1,000 square meters, just 2 blocks away from the main street. Directly above the building's door was a large badge that was the symbol for a mage, a hexagram. The hexagram represented the 6 basic elements of nature: light, dark, wind, water, fire, earth. It was the mark for all mages. After Rocky stopped the carriage, Green jumped down and opened the wagon's door, letting Zhao and Meg come out of the carriage. They then walked towards the building, but the 3 didn't even take 2 steps before a fat man came out quickly. The man was wearing servant clothes, but the fabric was made out of the finest silk. Along with his fat body, his clothing style looked inconsistent. He looked like a nobleman, and not like a servant. The fat man quickly walked in front of Zhao and bowed. "Dear mage, your servant, Carl, has come here to serve you." Zhao froze for a moment. He didn't think that the association would send out a servant to serve a mage. However, he still remembered what Green told him, so he just grunted and proudly walked inside. The first floor of the building obviously was a place to rest. It was divided into 2 areas. One of them had some couches and a coffee table, while the other had a few dining tables. This was part of the Mage Association's rules. If you were registered with them, you could rest and dine here for free. Zhao went to the lounge and sat down on one of the sofas. When Fat Carl saw Zhao sit down, he immediately waved at one of the other servants, who turned and went into the kitchen, then came out with a pot of tea and some cups. After putting the cups down, Carl personally poured tea for Zhao, then bowed and stood there. "Dear mage, how else may I serve you?" Zhao didn't touch the cup of tea. He just sat there and waved at Green, who said, "Carl, we are here today for a registration. It is my pleasure to serve such a great mage. Carl quickly said, "Sir, please come with me to the back so we can get you started on our registration procedures." Zhao gently nodded, then stood up. They followed Carl as he led them to the back of the hall, not seeing the naked flashing in Carl's eyes from time to time. Apparently, he wasn't such a simple character. Even Green didn't know that in addition of being in charge of the Mage Association, Carl was also an intelligence agent for the Persal Duchy. In fact, he knew exactly when Zhao came into the city. If he wasn't trying to know more about Zhao, he wouldn't have personally come meet them. Under normal circumstances, a registering mage wouldn't get such a personal reception. Chapter 78, Unusual Performance. Behind the association's building was a large open space with a length and width of 100 meters. Some distance away, set at 10-meter intervals, were targets that were used to test magic. All mages that wanted to register with the Mage Association had to cast a spell to prove that they were MG, and also for the association to know what rating to give them. Once they got to the grounds, Carl turned to Zhao and said, "Dear mage, please use your magic." "Any magic will do. If you want to get an advanced mage badge, then use some advanced magic." He then stepped aside and quietly watched Zhao. No one knew this, but although Carl wasn't a mage, due to his prolonged contact with mages over the years, he had gained some knowledge on magic and his ability to sense magic power was very sensitive. As long as a mage used magic, he would be able to analyze a mage's level. 8 times out of 10, his judgment would be correct. It was because of Carl's judgment that he was able to have an inseparable relationship with the Mage Association for decades. Carl slowly built up their system to rate mages, by checking their magic control, what type of magic they used, how proficient they were at incantations, etc., which all reflected a mage's level. There were a lot of mages that didn't have a low level, but this wasn't proportional to their fighting strength. Those mages have not experienced a lot of combat, so they lack the capacity to respond and control their magic in tight situations. Thanks to his superior judgment, Carl was able to ride the Persal clan's coattails and become head of their Mage Association. Usually, those who served the association at a high-level position were mages. When Zhao entered Casa City, Carl got the news that he was heading to the Mage Association to register, so he immediately decided that he should personally go greet Zhao. In the end, he wanted to know what level Zhao was. It had to be recognized that most people in the continent would instinctively reject black mages, including the Persal clan. However, when the Marquis clan got news of Zhao's fighting strength, the Persal clan had to pay attention to him. If a mage was at a high enough level, clans would want to form a relationship with him no matter what type of magic he used. That was because high-level mages were equivalent to nuclear weapons. Although they might not necessarily use such a weapon, it would be enough to deter an enemy just by having it. If a famous mage in the continent went to the Persal Duchy, the Persal clan would warmly receive him, even if they couldn't pull that mage into their clan. But for Zhao, the Persal clan took a more calm attitude. They didn't take any initiative to get close to him, even though Zhao was very strong. That was because one of the principles of this large clan was that ability takes second place, loyalty takes first place. The world has so many people, but those who were loyal were few. Even if your abilities were strong, if you always revolted, then no one would dare use you. That was the policy of the Persal clan. If you were an 8th level mage, but you weren't loyal to them, then they wouldn't use you. They would rather have 2 loyal 7th level mages than an unloyal 8th level mage. Zhao's identity was still a secret and they couldn't find out much about him, so this made the Persal clan reluctant to draw him in. Right now the Persal clan was developing well since they had managed to establish their own principality. They weren't adventurous, especially towards unknown factors, so even though Zhao had great strength, if they got him to join their clan, they wouldn't be able to rest well with what little they knew about him. So they gave him the cold treatment. But despite the cold treatment, they still had to pay attention to him. After all, since Zhao was now in Kosa City, the Persal clan's face wouldn't look good if they didn't do anything. Zhao didn't think too much about all of this. He just knew that he was short on money and registering at the Mage Association would at least give him an income of 10 gold coins per month. To most mages, This was probably nothing, but it was very important to Zhao. The amount of money the Buddha clan had could only add up to 50 gold coins, so this income was equal to a fifth of what they had. Of course, Zhao knew that he would get an advanced mage badge as long as he released some undead, but he didn't know how much strength he should let these people see. Being too high profile wasn't part of Zhao's character. In the end, without incantations, he just held up his staff and his undead appeared at his side. Zhao didn't call out his army of undead, he just wanted to do enough to prove that he could do magic, even though it was actually pseudo-magic. With the emergence of Alien, Carl's eyes widened. He had worked for the Mage Association for many decades and have seen countless mages using magic. Some of the magic was beautiful, while others were ugly. Some took a long time to cast, while others only took a short amount of time. But Zhao's casting time was really short. He just held up his magic staff and he was finished. Wasn't this a huge exaggeration? Zhao gently touched his undead. Like a puppy, when Alien was touched by his owner, it madly wagged its tail, almost killing Carl. Feeling scared, Carl quickly jumped away. After a while, Zhao returned his undead. Carl still wasn't reacting, so Green had to ask, "Did my master pass the test?" Carl quickly recovered. "Yes, dear mage. This way please." He led everyone back to the seating area. Once Zhao was sitting in the lounge, Carl turned and ran, then returned with some paper, which he put on the table in front of Zhao. "Dear mage, please fill out this form. This will complete all the formalities." Zhao took the piece of paper and carefully looked through it. He found that it was very simple. He just needed to fill in the blank about his name, age, sex, and other basic things. Zhao nodded, then gave the paper to Meg, who understood what Zhao meant. Carl then gave them a pen. While looking at Zhao's performance, Carl's heart was crying. There were no rules that said a mage had to fill out the form himself, but most registering mages would do so. This was out of respect towards the Mage Association. The association was a national organization, so even those who weren't part of it would still show a little respect. Carl had wanted Zhao to fill out the form, so as to collect some more information about Zhao. In the continent, there were special handwriting appraisers that could learn all kinds of things from looking at someone's handwriting. Carl was planning to send the form to the Purcell clan, who could hire someone to analyze the handwriting and see if they could find any clues to Zhao's identity. But he didn't expect that Zhao wasn't going to fill out the form himself, and instead got Meg to fill it out. His plans had been dashed. This made Carl highly wary of Zhao. In his opinion, everything Zhao did was intentional. It showed that he was trying to cover up his identity, which only dangerous people would do. In fact, from the very beginning, Carl had been constantly observing Zhao. He saw Zhao's attitude to the people around him and found that he acted like an orthodox nobleman. He had sent Zhao some tea just to see what he would do, but Zhao didn't even touch the cup of tea. And so far, Zhao didn't speak, so he couldn't judge anything from the sound of his voice. His plans just kept dropping off. Now his plan for him to fill out the form had also failed, which made Carl feel a deep impression from Zhao. He thought that Zhao must be a famous person on the continent, but his reputation was certainly not good, so he had to cover his identity. So what was Zhao's true identity? Carl had no idea. Chapter 79, Poison. Zhao looked at the badge in his hands. This wasn't an ordinary low mage badge, but an intermediate one. This badge was personally handed to him by Carl, along with 100 gold coins. Green didn't think that Carl would give Zhao such a high assessment. Zhao had just summoned a single undead, and he didn't use any other magic. Yet, he was able to get an intermediate mage badge. Anyway, an extra 100 gold coins would be a solution to their urgent needs. This would only add to the future development of the Buddha clan. The three went out to the carriage. Green looked up at the sky, then turned to Zhao. "Master, let's go get something to eat right now." "We'll go to one of the restaurants owned by the Marquee Company." There were a lot of places in the city that sold a variety of things for living, but they were different from the restaurant and hotel industry. Those places that sold daily supplies were usually on the low end, but you had to take the high road to get to the restaurants and hotels. To eat a meal there didn't just take a few coins. You should know that even one gold coin was sufficient enough for a common household to live on for a month. Zhao nodded, then got into the carriage. Green told Rocky where to go, who drove his carriage until they stopped in front of a restaurant. This restaurant in Kosa City was even bigger than the Mage Association, about 4 stories tall. When the carriage stopped, a man dressed in gorgeous leather armor came out. The armor looked beautiful, painted with a layer of reflective blue paint, which made him look sparkling. The clothes seemed to be the security uniform of the Marquis clan's restaurant. The man went to the carriage and bowed. With respect, sir, your carriage is not allowed to stay here. Please follow me over here. Green didn't argue with him. Instead, he got down from the carriage and opened the door, allowing Meg and Zhao to get out. The three then walked into the restaurant while security directed Rocky to park somewhere else. When the three went into the restaurant, 2 beautiful girls dressed in waitress uniforms immediately greeted them and bowed. Welcome to the Light Prism restaurant, dear mage. Do you have a reservation? Zhao didn't say anything. Green just came up and handed them the gold medal. The 2 girls looked at the gold medal carefully, then gave it back to Green and bowed again. Green at once said, arrange a room for us. We have come here to dine. The 2 girls escorted the 3 into the restaurant and arranged a room for them on the 3rd floor. The rooms in the 3rd floor weren't that much, only there for those who just wanted to eat a meal. Once they were there, Green randomly pointed out 2 dishes he wanted to order and some soup. Once he finished, Green calculated that the food would cost about 10 gold coins, but the ingredients to make it was only 1 gold coin. They were really profiteering off of their customers. After they made their order, the waitress immediately brought them a pot of tea. Zhao didn't move, waiting until they were served their dishes. Once they received their food, Green closed the door to the room and Zhao was finally able to take off his hat. He breathed out. This was suffocating me. What kind of life would you have if you always had to wear these clothes? Green smiled. It must have been uncomfortable to be unable to speak, but worth it, Zhao said. Anyway, today could be considered a good day since we gained 100 gold coins. Grandpa Green, maybe we should buy some meat and give it to the slaves to improve their lives. Although we were able to get 100 gold coins, Green said, we don't know when Laura would come back, so we should hold on to the money and save it for later. Zhao nodded helplessly. He had been a little too excited about the 100 gold coins. If they were to spend it in such a place like Kosa City, he feared that it would only last an hour before the money runs out. Meg poured a cup of tea and held it in front of Zhao. Master, have some tea. Zhao nodded, then took the cup. Meg then gave a cup of tea to Green. Zhao was about to drink from the cup, when suddenly there came a tone and a voice said, discovery of toxic substances. Opening host protection program. Extracting toxins. Toxin analysis complete. A chronic neurotoxin that would cause severe damage to the human nervous system. Expected time of death in 3 hours. Creating the antidote. Antidote creation complete. Please drink the spatial water. Using newly discovered toxins to strengthen robotic objects. Zhao froze in amazement. Then he immediately put down the cup. He looked at Green who was about to take a drink. Stop, Grandpa Green, the tea is poisoned. Green stopped for a moment, then his face changed. He immediately put his cup down on the table and rushed towards the door. He opened it and looked out, finding no one. He then closed the door and sat back down at the table. Master, is the tea really poisoned? Zhao nodded. It's a chronic poison, but you don't have to worry, Grandpa Green. The antidote to the poison is already in the spatial water, so you can rest assured. Green was still frowning. We're in a restaurant that belongs to the Marquis Company, so it should be impossible for others to try to poison us. The only culprit is the Marquis clan. But why would they want to deal with us? Zhao wrinkled his brow. It was strange. Supposedly the Marquis clan should have no reason to try to kill them, since they had even helped out members of the Marquis clan earlier. But if it wasn't the Marquis clan that did it, who else would it be? Meg suddenly spoke up. Master, Grandpa, I think that the Marquis clan attacked us because of the infighting within their clan. Couldn't that be the reason? Zhao and Green hadn't thought of that, But it made sense. Green nodded his head. That's most likely true. We had shown them the gold medal, which must certainly be an important thing. Otherwise, why would Laura give it to us as thanks for saving her life? Generally, that gold medal should have announced us as important guests, yet the person in charge of this restaurant didn't come out to greet us. If the person in charge didn't appear, then there must be a problem. Zhao frowned. It seems like we have stumbled into the Marquis clan's internal struggles. They told the immortal mercenary group what Laura was doing, and when the group failed to kill her because of us, they might have mistaken us as enemies. Green nodded. Master, I think we should leave at once. Zhao laughed slightly. Why should we leave? The food's already here. I wanted to see if they poisoned the food or not. If they really dared to do that, I would burn down this restaurant. Zhao felt ignited. Although he was an otaku that wanted to remain low-key, that didn't mean he doesn't feel anger. An honest man wasn't the same as a man without a temper. Although they still weren't completely sure who was behind this poisoning incident, only the infighting within the Marquis clan could have caused it. Did you think that your internal struggles had anything to do with me? I was just passing by and saved Laura's life from the immortal mercenary group. Just for that, you would go so far as to poison me? Zhao thought to himself. While thinking that, he picked up a knife and fork and ate the food. To be honest, it tasted delicious, but it wasn't toxic. Zhao told everyone that the food wasn't poisoned, but just to be sure, Zhao added some special water to the pot, which would detoxify the poison. While drinking the water during dinner, no one was afraid of poisoning. Chapter 80. Leveling up an undead. Satiated, they paid their check. While doing so, Green paid some attention to the attitude of the waitress. He wanted to see if he could spot any clues from her face. If the waitress was behind the poisoning incident, it would show. However, Green was disappointed because he could see nothing wrong. Even when Green gave her a tip, her actions were quite satisfactory. Since Green didn't see anything, he followed behind Zhao as they left the restaurant. They then immediately left the city, since there was no reason to stay. Plus, Green wanted to do some fishing. He believed that the people who tried to poison them would like to see the results. Poisoning a black mage was dangerous, because there were black mages who were masters at poison, so they couldn't be sure if their toxins had worked. It was precisely because of this that Green believed that those people would come see if they had been poisoned or not. If the three stayed in the city, they wouldn't be able to move around freely, and they might cause a big enough disturbance for the Purcell clan to intervene. Green didn't want to pull the Purcell clan into this conflict. He wanted to deal with the people who would dare poison them. Once they were outside the city, Zhao took out his undead and rode on it as they hurried towards Stony Mountain. As of now, it would take 2 hours for the poison to take effect. Zhao calculated the time as he started pretending to look more and more poisoned. Up till now, Zhao had not seen a trace of their enemies, but Green was sure that someone must be following them. Of course, trained killers from large clans wouldn't be so easily found. The season was spring and it was 4 in the afternoon, so the sky was still bright. Although the darkness of night would have been more favorable for Zhao to lure his enemies out, the poison didn't give them that much time, so he decided to go near the mountains where they could be alone. Spending 2 hours to lead people away from the city was very boring. But eventually, after calculating the time, Zhao turned to Green and said, "It's almost time, Grandpa Green." They had arrived at the mountains. Although there was a road that led here, it was clear that not many people used it, especially at this time of day. It was now 6 and starting to get dark. Green looked around and nodded. "We'll work with this," he said. Zhao got his undead to slow down. Then he returned it to the space. After that, the three fell to the ground and lay there, motionless. Nothing happened in the next half hour as they quietly laid there among the weeds, trying to be as still as possible. Luckily, it wasn't cold at this time of day, but just lying on the ground for a long time was really hard to accept. It wasn't until an hour had passed when there was finally some movement. Green heard faint footsteps coming towards them. Although Zhao didn't have as good a hearing as Green, he could still use the screen from his spatial farm. The screen was projected in front of his eyes. Even though he was outside the space, he could still use it to monitor his surroundings. And ever since he rose to level 6, His monitoring range had increased by 10 meters. Ordinarily, if a man was walking towards them from 50 meters away, they should be able to hear him, but Zhao didn't hear a sound. If it weren't for the screen, it would have been impossible for Zhao to find someone. The screen showed a little green dot approaching them. The green dot was a man that wore dark clothes and was carrying a black sword. He had a long nose and small eyes. Seeing the image of the man, Zhao couldn't help but think of one person, Shi Qian. Shi Qian was a fictional character from the Water Margin novels. Although he had an ugly appearance, he had amazing thieving skills, earning him the nickname Flea on a Drum. If this man went to Earth, he could play Shi Qian on TV without needing any makeup. The man stopped 20 meters from Zhao, then he took out some throwing darts. Zhao's heart couldn't help but curse loudly. Even though they had been lying here for an hour, this man was still being careful. Just as the man was about to throw a dart, Zhao suddenly summoned Drunk to stand in front of him. Now it was impossible for Zhao to get hit by the dart. The moment Zhao summoned Drunk, Green also moved. He was an 8th level warrior, with a yellow light flashing around his body. He sprang towards the man. Meg also got up and created a layer of blue to shield Zhao and herself. Several of the darts were thrown, but it was impossible for them to break Meg's shield. When Drunk appeared, the man knew that he must withdraw, but unfortunately he didn't have the opportunity. Green was stronger and faster than he had imagined, and was rushing towards him from 20 meters away. Even if he wanted to run, he wouldn't be able to, so the man simply didn't run. He closed his eyes and his lips moved, then he spit out black blood as he fell to the ground, dead. Zhao stood up just in time to see the scene. He really didn't expect that the man would act so decisively. When the man knew that he couldn't escape, he immediately committed suicide by swallowing the poison in his mouth, like you would see on TV. Green also didn't think that the man would choose suicide as he stood beside the man's body. Now it was impossible to question him. All he could do was examine the dead body, but there were no markings that told them who were the forces behind this man. Zhao also walked over and looked at the man, then he turned around and asked Drunk, "If we make this guy an undead, could we ask him anything?" Drunk shook his head. "No, Master. I'm now an undead, so I can only make low-level undead. So even if we turned him into an undead, he simply wouldn't be able to answer any questions." Zhao looked at the corpse, then made his decision. "Turn him into an undead. If they dare to come against us, we should show them what will happen to them." Obeying his command, Drunk casted a spell. Black gas formed and then floated down to the man's dead body. Once the black gas disappeared, there was nothing but a pale skeleton lying on the ground. Of course, his clothes didn't disappear, and he still had his sword. With nothing else to do with the man, Zhao threw him into the space. But he didn't think when the man entered the space, the voice would appear and said, "Low-class robotic object, leveling up, strengthening its abilities and strengthening it with toxins." Zhao was confused for a moment, but then his face lit up. He summoned the undead man out of the space. The man was now a dark green skeleton, just like Drunk. "Do you understand me?" Zhao asked. The man nodded. Zhao was overjoyed. "What's the name of the forces you belong to?" The man shook his head. "I am your faithful servant, Master." Zhao paused for a moment, then he asked a few more questions, but the man just gave that same answer. It was then that Zhao understood. The man didn't remember anything from before he died. Zhao had a wry smile. He thought that after the level up, the man would be able to tell him something useful, but it appeared to be in vain. Zhao then asked, "What are your abilities, Master?" "I can assassinate with darts and I can fight with a sword," the man said. The man wasn't like Drunk. He was a lower undead, so he naturally couldn't remember things from his past. But with the level up from the space, he could at least now use his assassination skills that he previously had. Zhao nodded. "Starting today, remember that I am your master, and your name will now be Shift," he said before he returned the man to the space. Chapter 81, Buying Seeds. Green and Meg had been looking at Zhao, but they couldn't hear the dialogue that was going on. Not understanding, Green moved closer before asking, "Master, what happened?" Zhao smiled. "I just told Drunk to turn this guy into an undead, and when I threw him into the space, I didn't expect that the space would make him stronger and improve his fighting skills, but this guy doesn't remember anything, so we can't get any information out of him." Green nodded his head. "Don't worry about that. I think that our enemies aren't finished dealing with us, so there will be a next time. We'll certainly be able to find clues for you, Master. And once Laura comes back, we'll tell her about what happened today and get her cooperation. She'll help us find who did this." "Yes, it's a good idea to get her to help us. This is related to her as well," Zhao said. "Now I think it's time to go back." Again, he called out his undead. Then they moved towards Stony Mountain. It had gotten completely dark before they returned to the mountain. Zhao was prepared to wait here until Laura came back to Casa City. After they got her cooperation over some matters, they will go back to the Black Waste. To tell the truth, Zhao had been struggling with this life. In his past life, he had lived in China, which was one of the safest countries in the world. But it wasn't as safe here. Just today, they went out into the city and someone tried to poison them. If his space didn't exist, he would have died from poisoning, which made him feel that this world was very dangerous. Ever since their return from Cosa City, the number of people who were monitoring Stony Mountain had lightened up. That was because by now the layer of black fog wasn't just covering the manor, but the entire Stony Mountain. Now those who were monitoring the mountain simply couldn't see anything, but they knew that there were a lot of undead guarding the mountain, so naturally everyone was afraid to go up. God knows how many undead were in that fog. Nobody wanted to die. As of now, Zhao was tossing over Stony Mountain. The mountain didn't really have anything useful except for the stones. Zhao got his undead to gather the stones, which would be used to make the discs for the millstones. He was also planning to bring the stones back to the Black Waste to help repair the castle. They were short of stones in the Black Waste because the dwarves had dug it all out. Now that they had such a good place full of stones, Zhao was going to help himself to them. As they were tossing over Stony Mountain, the few people outside that had been watching them were relaxing. It wasn't like they could see anything, and it was boring staring at a cloud of black fog all night. But it wasn't like Zhao wasn't doing anything. He got Green to take off his glittering body armor, so in the dark of night, Green was able to sneak off to Casa City. This time Green was going to Casa City for something important. He was going to buy seeds. Zhao needed him to buy all kinds of seeds that were on the continent. He would like to see if any of those seeds were useful, and if they were, then his space might level up. Green put on his normal warrior clothes before he rushed towards Casa City. Although Green was an 8th level warrior who was proficient in martial arts, it was still difficult to run towards a city that was normally 2 days away. His pace wasn't like an undead's. He required rest. He ran on the road for half the night, then he found a good place to rest. The next day, he ate some dry food in the morning. Then he was on his way again. He ran for an entire day, so by the time he arrived at Casa City, it was already getting dark. Fortunately, the gates hadn't closed yet. Since Green was dressed in his warrior clothes, he looked like an ordinary adventurer. In one day, the number of adventurers going into Casa City was too many to count, so the defenders simply didn't care. Green just entered the city after he paid the tax. Then he looked for a small hotel to stay in. Every day, once they completed a task, adventurers would go into Casa City to find food to eat. So Green went unnoticed. Even though this city was controlled by the Purcell clan, it was impossible to observe every single adventurer. After all, the population of Casa City was more than 1 million. Continuously rushing for a day made Green feel tired, so he had a good rest at the hotel that night. The next morning, he simply ate a little breakfast, then he went out into the city to look for seed companies. Casa City was a great city, but it wasn't known for farming, so it was rare to find places that sold seeds and tools. Green looked over the city for a long time, but the only place he could find that sold seeds was a grocery store. Fortunately, they had quite a lot of seeds, which allowed Green to save time. On the continent, there were various seeds that were ordinary, like the alfalfa and oil fruit seeds that Green had already bought. Altogether, Green bought 50 types of seeds. They were crop seeds, so generally not very expensive, and were definitely cheaper than magic seeds, which could cost dozens of silver coins per pound. But the store didn't have any magic seeds for him to buy, although Zhao had told him that he didn't need that much seeds, saying that just one of each would do. Green still bought a pound of each type of seed, so he ended up buying 50 pounds of seeds. Fortunately for someone like Green, this amount of weight was nothing, so after buying the seeds, he also bought some tools as well. He then left Kosa City. A day went by as Green kept on going on his way. Once it got dark, he stopped and simply rested for 2 hours. Then he continued to rush towards the mountains. He was able to return to Stony Mountain at midnight. At this time, those who were monitoring the mountain were more relaxed. Zhao had said that they wouldn't act in the evening as they would be resting. This was an opportunity for Green as he easily dived into the Bluestone Hills estate. The people in the estate were also resting, so Green didn't bother them and went to find his own place to sleep. Other than Green, it would be impossible for people to easily enter the Bluestone Hills estate. Zhao had released hundreds of undead, and also had Drunk looking over them. If it wasn't Green going up the mountain, Drunk would have led those undead to attack. 2 days of running had made Green tired, so he went to sleep for a while. Since he had bought the seeds, there wasn't anything else for him to do right now. Zhao knew that Green was back, but he didn't hurry to wake up Green. He knew that Green was working very hard these days. Zhao was crystal clear on how long the road is from Stony Mountain to Kosa City. It was because of this that he didn't bother Green, and let him have a good rest. Zhao was also relaxing. Once he had harvested the crops inside his space, he also didn't have anything else to do. Gathering the stones and making the millstone wasn't his job. Zhao was too weak. He couldn't lift anything heavy, let alone doing physical work. But he did bring some crops out of the space as food, greatly increasing the motivation of the slaves. Chapter 82, 3 Levels. Green woke up shortly before noon. After he used the spa pool in his room to wash his face, he went out the door. The estate was now busy. From time to time, the undead would carry in stones from outside the manor, while the slaves were either learning or making millstones. It could be said that making those stones was hard to do, especially without any tools. If you wanted to make the discs, you would have to spend a lot of time. Plus these slaves weren't real masons. Their skills could only be considered at the apprentice level. But with the men doing the heavy lifting, and the women doing the cleaning, they were able to grind down these stones, so the entire estate looked like a big stone processing factory. If outsiders were to see this, they wouldn't believe it. The reasons that Zhao came to Stony Mountain was synonymous with mystery. Zhao was standing in the yard of the estate. It wasn't like he was watching over the slaves, it was just that he wasn't of much help, so all he could do was stand there and send some of the stones that the undead had brought into the space. After such a long time, the slaves got to know what kind of person Zhao was. It didn't matter if you laughed with him, he wouldn't be angry. They became accustomed to Zhao's presence. This is no wonder because they had been living in Zhao's space, and never far from a source of food and water, and also not far from Zhao. It was precisely because of this daily life that the slaves lost their tension around him. Even though Zhao had been standing there right next to them, they didn't feel uncomfortable. Then Zhao saw that Green had woke up, so he went to meet him. "Grandpa Green, I hope we didn't wake you up." "No, Master," Green said as he shook his head. "I have brought back the seeds like you asked. Let's go into the house and look at them." Zhao nodded, then followed Green into the house. They entered a room where there was a big bag, which contained a large number of seeds, in addition to some tools for masonry. If it wasn't Green, it would be impossible for a person to carry all of this stuff back to Stony Mountain in such a short time. Green took out the tools first, then handed some bags of seeds to Zhao. The seeds were split into 10-pound bags, so even Zhao could carry it into the space. Although he had drank the water of nothingness, causing his strength to be less than average, this weight wasn't a problem. Zhao took the seeds and said to Green, "I will go." He disappeared in front of Green, who didn't say anything while holding the tools. Inside the space, Zhao couldn't wait as he opened the bag of seeds, which was followed by the voice announcing the long list of seeds, making Zhao feel dizzy. found new crop seeds, evaluating seed quality, improved seeds, replacing rice seeds inside space. You can now purchase this seed in the shop. Found new crop seeds, evaluating seed quality, inferior, no merit. Seed cancelled. Found new crop seeds, evaluating seed quality, high yield, extracting advantages, strengthening legumes inside space. You can now purchase this seed in the shop. Found new crop seeds, evaluating seed quality. Zhao couldn't follow along with the long list, so he quickly entered his hut and opened the screen to see the shop. Sure enough, there were new seeds appearing. Although the voice wasn't finished yet, there was already a total of nearly 10 new kinds of seeds. But this wasn't important to Zhao. What he wanted to know was how much this would level up his space. Once the long list of seeds came to an end, the voice then immediately said, "Due to the discovery of new crop seeds, your level has risen to 7. If you wish to, you can cultivate 2 new acres of land. You will be rewarded with a bag of pea seeds, which can fill 2 acres of land. Due to the discovery of new crop seeds, your level has risen to 8. You will be rewarded with a bag of cucumber seeds, which can fill 2 acres of land. Due to the discovery of new crop seeds, your level has risen to 9. If you wish to, you can cultivate 2 new acres of land. You will be rewarded with a bag of pumpkin seeds, which can fill 2 acres of land." The voice stopped. Because of the seeds that Green brought back, his level had risen by 3, but Zhao found this unsatisfactory. He wanted to use these seeds to reach level 10 to see if he could open up the pasture. Not only would that increase his source of revenue, he would also be able to put in a lot of powerful spirit beasts inside the space. But obviously, the higher you go, the more difficult it becomes to level up. Even though Green brought back so many seeds, it didn't raise his level higher than 9. Zhao sighed. Then he went over to look inside the barn. The voice said that he could also cultivate 4 new acres of land, but land cultivation required money. Right now he only had 600 gold coins. It wasn't even enough to cultivate 2 acres, not to mention 4. The only thing Zhao could do was sell something inside the space in exchange for gold coins. Then he would be able to cultivate the 4 acres of land. The space was still growing oil fruits. He didn't want to lose his corn, and there were too few of the other crops, like the cabbages, so they simply weren't enough money. The only thing he could sell were the radishes. Zhao couldn't help but curse loudly. At the moment, he had about 1,500 gold coins worth of radishes. If he sold them in the space, combine it with the 600 gold coins, he would be able to cultivate new land, but he would barely have anything left over. But Zhao couldn't think of another way, so he reluctantly sold the radishes, then cultivated 4 new acres of land. This cost a total of 1,700 gold coins. Cultivating 2 acres of land at level 7 would cost 700 gold coins, while cultivating 2 acres of land at level 9 would cost 1,000 gold coins. Now all Zhao had left was 400 gold coins. But then he also had to use 150 of that to buy some radish seeds from the shop to grow in the new acres of land. Originally, he had other seeds that he could have planted in the 4 acres, but they didn't know when Laura would come back to Casa City. When she returns, and they didn't have any radishes to sell, that would be a shame. Plus, this time Zhao wanted to see if he would be able to get any radish seeds. If that was possible, he wouldn't need to buy any from the shop, which would help save money. Sighing, after planting the radish seeds, Zhao came out from the space. To be honest, he was still very disappointed. He didn't reach his desired level, but there was no helping it now. He could only wait until after they sold the radishes. Zhao felt that once he reached over level 10, something good will happen. He didn't know what, but according to the game routine, after reaching that threshold, his reward will be very high. The most promising thing for Zhao was to open up the pastures, which would enhance his strength as soon as possible. Green watched as Zhao glumly walked out of the house. Surprised, he quickly went over. "Master, how is it?" Zhao shook his head. "Nothing much. The space did level up, but I didn't get what I wanted. It appears that the seeds of common crops won't have that much of an effect. If we want it to go higher, then we'll need to find more advanced level plants." Green didn't know as much about the space as Zhao, But when Zhao said that the space had leveled up successfully, he should have been happy, so he asked, "Master, doesn't leveling up mean increasing the land?" Zhao nodded. "Ah, yes. I have increased it by 4 acres, but I also sold all of our radishes to the space because I needed the money to buy the cultivated land. All of our radishes are now gone. The only radishes left are the ones that I planted in the 4 new acres." Green smiled. "It's not a problem as long as we have more land." Although Green has never played a farm game before, these days Zhao had been telling him a lot about the farm. So he also knew that the radishes could be sold inside the space to make money. In Green's opinion, since the money couldn't be taken outside the space, it wasn't real money, so he didn't care. Chapter 83, Mosquito Meat. Green didn't care, but that doesn't mean that Zhao wasn't sad. How could he not be sad when he knew that in the future, if his level was high enough, then he would be able to take the gold out of the space. But now everything was useless. They could only wait until after the radishes were sold for the money for the next step in their plans. Green saw that Zhao was upset, so he tried to cheer him up. "Master, we have rarely gone into the woods to collect seeds from the plants. If we try to collect them now, maybe we'll find some useful seeds, then we won't need to buy them. And it might also level up the space." Zhao gave a wry smile. He didn't have much hope for that. The Ark continent had tens of thousands of years of history. In all that time, although the continent wasn't known for its agricultural development, it was still doing well. By now they were growing crops that were carefully picked and chosen. For instance, when he brought in the bamboo rice seeds, it immediately replaced the rice seeds that were already in the space. What does this mean? It represented that the bamboo rice crops, which were carefully developed, was more excellent. There was no need to mention the plants that grew in the wild because he feared that they wouldn't be better than any crops. But eating mosquito meat was better than nothing, so Zhao nodded and said, "Well, it's not too busy right now. Let me come and help you, Grandpa Green." "No. I'll do it by myself." Green shook his head. "If they see me collecting seeds from those plants, maybe those people won't think that it's strange when they find out about the radishes we're selling. It would be our excuse." Zhao hadn't thought of this point. "Well, then do so, but you have to be careful, Grandpa Green. Stay close to the vicinity of the mountain. Last time, someone tried to poison us. And there might be a next time." "Master worries too much." Green smiled. "I'll bring out my own water and dry food, so I won't eat or drink anything I didn't prepare myself. Nothing will happen." "Well, then when you go out, take some of the spatial water. Even if someone wants to poison you, it would be impossible. And you must not go too far, or at least let me send an undead to follow you. If something happens, the undead will bring you back fast." "No. I'll be fine on my own," Green said. "But if a big undead were to follow you, it could carry anything good that you might find. Otherwise, I'm afraid that you'll have to lug a bag around, which might not fit everything." Green hadn't thought of that, so he nodded his head. "Will the undead be able to understand me?" "It won't be a problem. Since they're level up, I found a lot of clever undead. Even though they still can't speak, their intelligence shouldn't be any worse than an average person. You can rest assured." "Well, then I'll go," Green said. "No." Zhao smiled. "You don't have to worry about it yet. Anyway, it's not like the plants can run in the mountains. Recently, there's not much to do in the manor other than waiting for Laura to come back, so you can at least rest for a while." It was just as Zhao said. In this period of time, Stony Mountain was very safe. No matter how powerful the Purcell clan or the other forces were, there were few people who were willing to provoke them since Zhao's identity was known as a black mage. Nobody wanted to provoke a black mage. Mrin came over. It was now time to eat, and she was calling Zhao and Green for lunch. Mrin looked at Green, and asked, "How is it? Did it work?" Zhao didn't want her to worry. "It's fine, rest assured." Green understood what Zhao meant, so he turned to Mrin and smiled. "We're thinking of me going around the mountains to see if I could find some other useful plants for the young master." He now has a total of 18 acres of land, and in the future, the seeds from these wild plants might get him more and more land. When Mrin heard what Green said, she was very happy. In their view, More land equals more money, which would help the Buddha clan thrive. They still didn't know that once the space levels up, Zhao would be able to open a pasture. He didn't tell them yet because he wanted to get it done first. The manor became busy as several people had lunch. The slaves seemed very happy, and why shouldn't they be? They get to eat and work hard, and learn to read and write as a reward. In their opinion, this was simply living a lord's life. The slaves weren't educated like normal people. While ordinary people might go through a traditional education, the slaves were taught an education that was meant for slaves. If they had parents who were slaves, then they would also be a slave from the moment of birth, so they would completely accept the enslaving education as their primary education, in which they were taught that their owner was always right. This enslaving education was like brainwashing, to make a person slave from the beginning to the end. The nobles and slave owners in the continent have been doing that because of a large-scale slave rebellion that happened before. Unfortunately, those slaves were suppressed. Ever since the slave rebellion, those nobles found that suppressing the slaves cost too much money, so they looked for alternatives. They discovered that spending just a little bit of money to educate those who grew up as a slave would repress any feeling of rebellion. Any civilization that had developed for tens of thousands of years would not be simple. There had to be reasons why nobles would rule the continent for so many years. Naturally, if they didn't develop such means and methods, how could they stay in power for so long? It was because of these reasons that when Green bought the slaves, their hearts now belonged to the Buddha clan. However, Daisy and Anne grew up differently than the slaves. They were once commoners, and although the living standards of commoners on the continent weren't that great, it was still better when compared to a slave's. The most notable part was that if you were a slave for life, then your family will be slaves for generations. Zhao knew this, so every day he would spend some time with the slaves so they would grow more comfortable being around him. He knew that changing the ideas of these slaves won't happen overnight. Teaching the slaves to know how to read will let these slaves know more about the truth. Zhao didn't think that one day he would change the world. He knows that he's just a regular otaku. After coming here, he could only achieve things because his spatial farm was a cheat. Besides, he had no ambitions to change the world, especially when he knew that this society had been based on slavery for tens of thousands of years. He just wanted an easy life. But since he still remembered how he lived in his past life, he was not accustomed to ruling over slaves. So he set it up that as long as you work hard, you would gain freedom as a reward. As for the black waste, Zhao knew that it was his own private property only because all of the nobles in the continent didn't want it. After all, an ordinary stone was just a stone. But Zhao knew that once he reformed the soil of the black waste, an ordinary stone would become a piece of jade. It was like turning a baby into a cute baby that everyone wants to grab. So if you wanted to protect your baby, you have to have the strength. The strength that he had now wasn't strong enough. But once he opens his pasture, who would dare offend him? Chapter 84. Spooky actions. Midnight, a tone chimed and the voice told Zhao that his crops had matured, so it was time to harvest. But he just slept until dawn. He wanted to see if he just left the radishes in the space, if they would grow some seeds. That was why he didn't bother harvesting them right away. Unfortunately, the next morning, Zhao went into the space only to find that the radishes just remained in a state of maturity, making him very disappointed. Zhao couldn't help but mutter, "It seems like nothing will happen if I just leave them in the space." After he said that, the voice came again, "Required to be at level 10 to receive seeds from root crops. Please be patient." Zhao was stunned for a moment, then he became delighted. He thought that he simply couldn't get any seeds from the radishes, but now he just found out that as long as he reaches level 10, he would fulfill the requirement. This just confirmed for him that level 10 was a hurdle that he needed to cross. Then he would be able to get even more things. In a happy mood, Zhao harvested the radishes, as well as the corn and oil fruits, before leaving the space. Yesterday, Green had a good rest, but today, he was ready to go. In the morning, after breakfast, Zhao took out his undead which had become very clever. Even though it couldn't communicate with Zhao, it could still perform his commands. Zhao wasn't worried as he told the undead that it wasn't allowed to go too far from Green, and when 4 hours had passed, it would stop Green from whatever he was doing, and return him to the manor. Although Green wasn't afraid of anything, he did not argue against Zhao's kindness. He might not necessarily find any plants they need, but he didn't mind. In fact, there were a lot of high-level plants that could be found in a forest. Some of them were magic plants that were very aggressive, yet could be used as magic materials. If you could get those magic plants to a city, you would be able to sell them at a good price. For this reason, it was almost impossible to find these kinds of plants around here. These mountains were too close to Casa City. There were a lot of manors and villas built around here, but even if there wasn't any housing, a lot of mercenaries would have still swept through the mountains many times, trying to make some money from selling high-level magical plants. So Zhao didn't hold too much hope for Green finding anything. It was like trying to save a dead horse with medicine. They could only wait until after they sold their radishes. Maybe then they would be able to buy some useful magic plants. Until then, they couldn't do anything. Those who were monitoring them saw Green sitting on an undead that was walking around the mountains. Green's movements aroused those people into action as they firmly fixed their sights on that undead, but to their surprise, the undead wasn't heading towards the road, it went directly into the mountains, which scared everyone who had been monitoring the Black Mage. In the continent, everyone knew that Black Mages were usually cantankerous, so these people thought that the Black Mage must have found them, and was now sending his forces against them. Some of them ran from their spot. Those who were running were mercenaries that had been hired by small clans. They were completely different from those trained assassins from those big clans. The assassins would try to complete a task even at the expense of their life. As long as the task had been completed, it was worth it. But these mercenaries didn't have such loyalty. They would work for your money, but the moment there was any danger, they would immediately run away. Green knew someone was monitoring him. When he came out of Stony Mountain, he put up his guard, and found that there were a lot of people in the area. However, Green didn't touch them. He wanted them to watch him. Under the attention of everyone, the undead carried Green into the forests in the mountains. Once they reached the forest, Green got down from Alien and looked around. It was obvious that this piece of the forest had already been searched through. Although there were still trees here, there were also many places that had been trodden on, revealing traces of people rummaging everywhere. Green could see many places that had been dug up. Apparently, anything useful had already been poached. Green shook his head, then walked into another part of the forest, while making sure to carefully look around for plants that Zhao might want. There were many well-known useful plants on the continent, but he simply didn't even see a shadow of one. Although Green was a warrior with no knowledge of alchemy, he had lived with Marin for so many years. Do not forget, Marin was a mage, so even though she was ignorant about most magical plants, she still knew a thing or two that helped her make magic potions. Because of this, Green picked up some things from her over the years, so he had a little bit of knowledge about magic plants, but he didn't see any. Green couldn't help but sigh as he explored. But while walking into the depths of the forests, he suddenly saw 2 wild fruit trees. Wild fruit trees were common on the continent, but although their fruit tasted good, they didn't have a high yield, so no one used them in large-scale farming. It wasn't a magic plant, so the great nobles wouldn't eat them, and generally, any commoners that had land wouldn't grow them as food. If they wanted to eat these fruits, they could just go into the mountains and find a lot of these common trees growing in the wild. The 2 trees were obscured from view, so Green didn't notice them until now. He looked at the 2 wild fruit trees, then he took out a big sword and cut off a few branches, which he fed to Alien so that they would be carried in its body. Green did this because these trees were good at surviving. As long as you stuck the branches into wet ground, they would germinate and slowly grow into a new tree, like turning a dead horse into a living horse. Those who were monitoring Green were dumbfounded. They didn't understand what he was doing. This stuff could be found anywhere in the mountains. Were they some kind of treasure that they didn't know about? They were all staring at Green's strange behavior. Keep in mind that these people were ready to report anything they find to their clans, as well as collect the plants that Green was collecting, so they could take them home and examine them. As Green walked around, he couldn't even remember the total number of plants that he had collected. That was because he had even collected the most common plants, including long grass. Green had been climbing into the depths of the mountains for 3 hours, finding plants and filling the body of the undead. Finally, he stopped, and then walked straight back towards Stony Mountain. Once Green was gone, those who were monitoring him immediately grabbed some of the plants that Green had been collecting, and then went back to their clans to give their report. In fact, Green didn't actually do anything outrageous today. He just collected a variety of plants that were worthless, but his actions seemed suspicious. Green didn't care how they reacted. He only cared about protecting their identity. As long as their identity wasn't exposed, then he wasn't afraid. By the time Green made it back to Stony Mountain, it was afternoon and time for lunch. Mrin immediately prepared something for him to eat, and Zhao brought the undead full of plants into the space, regardless if the plants were good or bad. Once those plants were in the space, the voice said, Chapter 85, Powerful Level Up. Discovery of new plants, no merit. Do not extract. Discovery of new plants, no merit. Do not extract. Discovery of new plants. Detecting possible edible fruit and wine. Disadvantage. Yield is low. Analyzing data of saplings, it can now be purchased in the shop. Discovery of new plants, no merit. Do not extract. Discovery of new plants. Detecting toxins in the shrubs. Plant has high survival rate. Analyzing data of saplings, it can now be purchased in the shop. Extracting toxins. Strengthening the robotic objects with toxins. Strengthening spatial water with detoxification. Discovery of new plants. Toxic barbed vines. Plant has high survival rate. Analyzing data of vines, it can now be purchased in the shop. Extracting toxins. Strengthening the robotic objects with toxins. Strengthening spatial water with detoxification. Extracting thorn protection. Strengthening robotic objects' attack capabilities. Extracting raw materials. Strengthening humanoid objects' survival capabilities. Discovery of new plants, no merit. Do not extract. Discovery of new plants. Harmful weed species. Plant has high survival rate. Aggressive. Extracting advantages. Strengthening spatial herbicide. Over 100 plants in this long list made Zhao feel dizzy, but he heard several good things, especially those poisonous bushes and barbed vines. If they could be used to make a wall, then that would be helpful. He also noticed another thing. Zhao didn't expect that extracting the advantages from the weeds would be able to strengthen the herbicide. This was great. If he later used the herbicide, its ability would be stronger. The rest of the stuff was no good. There were just a few plants that had some basic medicinal effect that wasn't very strong, like the ginkgo tree. They weren't of much use. However, even Green wouldn't have thought that since this morning, he would have been able to gather so many samples that would help. Although these 100 plants weren't magical and they weren't worth a lot of money, they still had some advantages. Once the voice stopped speaking, Zhao's heart grew nervous. He didn't know whether or not the space would level up. Suddenly, the voice came again. Due to the discovery of new plants, you have risen to level 10. You have now reached the requirements for overall improved functions in the space. The pasture is open. Seeds can now be extracted from root crops. The gold coins inside the space can now be used outside. Increasing size of house. 3 teleport points can now be set. Increasing range of monitoring system to 500 meters in diameter. Can now set the teleport points as the center. A new feature has been added to the space. Host is given a cane that can portably control the space. Cane is binded to the host. Cannot be damaged. Cannot be dropped. Please select a style for the cane. Congratulations, host. What Zhao heard made him almost jump for joy. He didn't think that when he reached level 10, the spatial functions would become so powerful. All of these features were what he needed. Zhao stood there, laughing. But although he heard what the voice said about these new features, he still needed to fully learn how to use their functions, otherwise he wouldn't get the biggest benefits out of them. Zhao quickly went into the hut and accessed the screen. Once he opened it, sure enough, there was a new file titled, New Spatial Features. With trembling hands, Zhao took several deep breaths, then pressed the file. A white light came from the screen and shot towards Zhao's head. He felt a little pain, but he knew that he might have to sleep for a while, so he immediately laid down on the bed and fainted. A lot of new features filled Zhao's head as he fell into a deep sleep, not knowing how long it would be before he wakes up. Finally, Zhao opened his eyes. He looked around and stretched. Slowly sitting up, he laughed. Boy, these are some big changes. While he was sleeping, his brain completely received all the information about the new features. He felt like he was getting smarter, almost able to recite the information word for word. He now understood what he could do in the space. The barn couldn't hold any spirit beasts, but now that he could open the pasture, he would be able to establish a ranch that could raise a lot of spirit beasts. However, the spatial farm and the spatial ranch aren't the same game. The ranch is invisible to the farm and the farm is invisible to the ranch. If Zhao wanted to go to the ranch from the farm, he would have to think it to be able to move into the spatial ranch zone. Like the game, the ranch could be used to raise animals, but he didn't know how many animals he could raise. Another ability that he got once he reached level 10 was that he could now get seeds from root crops, like radishes, so later he could save money on seeds. Not only that, he could also now take the gold coins from inside the space into the outside world. Before, the coins inside the space were only virtual currency, and couldn't be taken out before he reached level 10. But now if he earned 100,000 gold coins inside the space, then they could become real 100,000 gold coins. It was another source of revenue. As for the new teleport point functions, it was one of Zhao's favorites. He can set up to 3 teleport points, which were actually entrances into the space. In order to get to Kosa City from the Black Waste, he had to sit inside his undead for days. But now he doesn't need to do that with these teleport points. If he set up a teleport point on Stony Mountain, and also set one in his castle on Iron Mountain, he could just enter the space and travel back and forth between these 2 points. However, he could only set up 3 teleport points. Still, this was a very powerful feature, and with this level up, the range of his monitoring system had increased. Not only had the range increased to 500 meters in diameter, he could now see everything within in that range with a teleport point as the center. That wasn't the only thing that increased. His house has gotten bigger as well. Zhao had a thatched hut where only one person could live in. There was simply no way for other people to come live with him. However, now he could change his hut into something bigger, like a villa. Finally, also one of Zhao's favorites, was the new feature that allowed him to control the spatial farm portably. All of this power could now be controlled by the cane in his hand, which has been designated to Zhao. He could not lose the cane or drop it. With the cane, he could use the features of the farm, like the shovel, the bucket, pesticides, and herbicides. All of these functions would be focused on the cane. He could even use it to access his screen more conveniently. It was because of this feature that Zhao opened the screen again to see if a new button had appeared. There was now a button with a picture of a cane on it. When Zhao saw it, he immediately pressed the button, and then came a list of pictures of canes. There were some wooden ones, and some that were like a sword. Some were gorgeous, some were plain, and some gave a holy feeling, while others were made of strange bones. Zhao carefully looked through these pictures. Although he was very fond of a few, he eventually chose the one that was made of bones. It looked like a staff that was used by a black mage. When Zhao chose this picture, there was a white flash, and suddenly this staff appeared in his hands. The staff was made of pale bones, and at the top was a tiny skull. The skull was green and clear, like it had been carved from some kind of precious crystal. Chapter 86, Testing New Features. Once the staff was in Zhao's hands, The voice came and said, "Ghost staff. It can automatically shorten or stretch from 0.5 meters to 5 meters. It can also illuminate a dark environment, and it allows the host to use the features of the space." Zhao froze. He really didn't think that this staff would have such an effect. What a surprise. While the first two functions weren't of much use to Zhao, they were better than nothing. The size of the staff was just right, so Zhao was currently satisfied. Zhao turned around and looked at the screen again. He pressed the button with the store icon and a list of things that could be purchased in the shop appeared. First were the most ordinary seeds. In addition to that were some seeds that originally came from the spatial farm. And finally, there were some plants that belonged to the Ark continent. Continuing to look at the screen, Zhao found a button for decorations. He pressed the decorations button, and rows of housing pictures appeared. Sure enough, below each picture was a marked price. It seemed that in this game, he still needed money to buy a new house. Zhao looked at the pictures, and was finally able to find one that he could afford. What he bought was a little villa-like house, which also had tall fences and a kennel. It only took a gold coin to buy this house. Once he pressed the button for the house he wanted, everything around him started to shake. Then a white light flashed. After the white light disappeared, Zhao was shocked. He was no longer sitting in his hut, but instead was sitting on a large sofa in a living room. The living room was 20 square meters, while the sofa was big enough to hold 5 people. The floor was carpeted, and in front of the sofa was a beautiful coffee table made of some kind of wood that was cherry red in color. Facing the sofa was a 12-inch screen, and on the coffee table was a remote. Zhao stood up from the sofa and looked around the house. On the same floor as the living room was 2 bathrooms, a spa room, a utility room, a kitchen, a dining room, and 2 bedrooms. He went into a bathroom and discovered that it was modern. It was 5 square meters, with a toilet, a bathtub where you could adjust the hot and cold water coming out of the shower head, and a sink with a small mirror hanging over it. The other bathroom was just the same. The equipment in the kitchen were very complete. There were some Western appliances as well as sparkling utensils that were apparently new. The dining room had an elongated tables that could seat 8 people, and on the wall hung an ordinary landscape painting. The spa room was paved with small, non-slippery stones, and the walls were trimmed with tiles. It was a nice room where you could lounge. As for the utility room, it was filled with everyday supplies, from sinks and tub cleaners to brooms for sweeping. It was paramount to keep a house clean. Zhao even saw an ironing board. Finally, there were the bedrooms, which were relatively simple. There was a bed, a wardrobe, 2 bedside tables that held lamps, and a window. The 2 bedrooms were exactly the same, but this was just the first floor, which took up 1,200 square meters of land. Zhao then went up to the second floor. There was no living room or kitchen, but there were bathrooms. In addition to 5 bedrooms, 4 of the bedrooms were furnished pretty much the same way as the 2 bedrooms on the first floor, but the last bedroom only had a 32-inch screen. Zhao went back to the living room and sat down on the sofa. He then picked up the remote. It had the same buttons like a regular remote, but on the bottom was a smooth surface, sort of like a touch screen. Looking at the remote, Zhao pressed the power button. The screen lit up. What was on the screen looked almost exactly like a desktop with icons and everything. Zhao tried clicking an icon, and the voice came and said, "Do you wish to set up a teleport point now?" These words also appeared on the screen. Out of habit, Zhao said, "Yes." After he said this, the screen changed. The words disappeared, replaced by a map. At that moment, the voice spoke again. "Select teleport point." Zhao carefully looked at the map. It was clearly a map of all the places he had been, everything from the Black Waste all the way to Casa City. However, the map only showed these places. Everywhere else was dark. Just like a computer, there was a cursor in the form of a small white arrow. Zhao saw the cursor, and then he looked back at the remote in his hand. So it was a touch screen. His finger gently paddled across the smooth surface, and the cursor on the screen moved with him. Zhao couldn't help but smile. He really didn't think it would be so simple to operate it. Carefully looking at the map, the cursor moved to the Bluestone Hills estate on Stony Mountain. Then he clicked on it. Sure enough, The voice came again. The first teleport point will be in Bluestone Hills, yes/no. Zhao nodded. Yes, the tone chimed and a voice once again said, the first teleport point has been established in Bluestone Hills. Would you like to choose your second teleport point? In the map, a small green dot immediately lit up on the Bluestone Hills estate. Zhao quickly said, yes, on the castle in Iron Mountain. He wanted to try and see if the screen had any voice control capabilities. Yes, indeed it did. Once he finished speaking those words, a little green dot immediately started twinkling over the castle in Iron Mountain, followed by the voice saying, the second teleport point will be in the Iron Mountain Castle. Yes/no. Zhao nodded again. Yes. The green dot sat down on the castle in the map. Then a tone chimed and a voice said, the second teleport point has been established in the Iron Mountain Castle. Would you like to choose your third teleport point? Zhao stared at the screen for a moment. Then he shook his head. No, do not build one. The spatial voice said nothing. The screen changed back to the desktop. Zhao clicked an icon, and suddenly a three-dimensional map appeared. It showed almost all of Stony Mountain, including the manor. Zhao's fingers moved the cursor across the screen and clicked on the manor's yard. The image of the yard immediately appeared. Then came a chiseling sound. Zhao was surprised for a moment as he looked around. When he couldn't find where the sound was coming from, he looked towards the screen, and he saw people working on the stones, which was where the chiseling sound was coming from. His face erupted with a smile. Before, the screen never had any sound. But ever since the level up, the screen now had an audio function. This was a surprise. Zhao then switched the image on the map to show the castle on Iron Mountain. What he saw was basically the same, except now he had a wider range. At one time he was only able to see inside the castle, but now he could see a few things outside of it. He was so happy he felt like crying tears of joy. He pressed the OK button the remote, and the voice came and said, do you wish to enter the second teleport point? Yes, Zhao said. He couldn't wait as he put down the remote. While holding his staff, he stood up and with a thought, he exited the space. Outside, Zhao looked everywhere. He was currently standing in his bedroom that was in the castle. He immediately ran to the window and opened it, giving himself a panoramic view of a land full of black soil. He had really returned to Iron Mountain. Zhao laughed as he leaned out the window. The space's new features were a really powerful force. It was almost too powerful. With this, he could get things done more efficiently. It would only take a second to travel between Iron Mountain and Stony Mountain. After a moment had passed, Zhao calmed down. With a thought, he moved back into the space, then said, switch to first teleport point. Then with another thought, he exited the space again, but now he found himself in his bedroom in the Bluestone Hills estate. As he listened to those chiseling sounds coming from outside his bedroom, he couldn't press down the joy in his heart. Now that he had learned how to use the teleport points, Zhao knew that it was time to open the pasture and establish his ranch. Chapter 87, Ranch. Upon entering the space, Zhao at once said, open the pasture. The tone chimed and a voice said, opening pastures requires you to be at level 10. You have reached the requirements. Are you sure you wish to open the pastures? Yes, Zhao immediately said. He waited for some sort of reaction from the space, but this time he was disappointed. Nothing happened inside the space before the voice said, pastures have been opened. Ranch has been established successfully. Zhao turned around and looked, but he found that nothing had changed. Not even a shadow of a ranch was there. Although he knew this would happen, he was still disappointed. With a thought, a white light enveloped his body, then he disappeared. The next thing he saw was a boundless amount of green grass. Just then, the voice came back. Welcome to the Spatial Ranch. At the ranch's current level, you can raise up to 1,000 animals. Zhao froze. The ranch was just established and he could already keep 1,000 animals. This was too good, right? He looked around, but he couldn't find anything that looked like a house. He was just surrounded by a huge prairie. Zhao felt it was strange. When he played these sort of games before, there would at least be some simple walls and a nesting area. But how come there's nothing? He was worried about animal reproduction. In the game, There was a fixed area where the animals could make babies. If there was no place like that, then he was in big trouble. He wasn't a veterinarian. He didn't know how to help animals give birth. From this thought, Zhao tried saying, "Display area for animal reproduction." The moment he said this, an area less than 100 meters from him started to flash with twinkling green lights and a yellow perimeter surrounded it. When Zhao saw it, he couldn't help but feel relieved. As long as this area was here, he wouldn't have to worry about animal reproduction. But then Zhao discovered another problem. There was no feed mill like the ones in the game. How would he feed the animals? And he didn't see any water. What would the animals drink? He could see no way. So Zhao had to first ask, "What will the animals eat and drink?" The voice came and said, "The feed that the host adds will automatically be converted into grass for the animals' consumption. 1 kilometer away is a river for the animals to drink water." Zhao was shocked. It turned out that the feed would be turned into grass. In the game, most of the animals were herbivores, so this grass would solve the problem. But he was planning to put some creatures from the Ark continent into the ranch. And there would definitely be some carnivorous predators among them. Those carnivores wouldn't eat grass, right? Zhao quickly asked this question, but the voice said that there wasn't enough data to give him an answer. Not knowing what to do now, Zhao asked another question. What feed could be converted into grass? The voice said, "Found items in the barn that could be used as animal feed. Radish leaves, corn, wheat, and rice." Zhao paused, realizing that he would be able to use his crops. It seemed like if it could be used as feed, it could be converted into grass. Now he raised his staff and a white light was emitted, projecting a screen that had a page showing the shop, and below that was another page showing the ranch's shop. These pages were no different than the game. There were black and white pictures of animals, which represented the animals that he couldn't buy. As for the animals with colored pictures, he could definitely buy those. Right now the only ones he could buy were chickens and rabbits. Each chicken costs 80 gold coins. Each rabbit costs 120 gold coins. According to the game, these prices weren't expensive, but if you were to show them to anyone in the Ark continent, they would call you crazy. You should know that in the Ark continent, long-tailed chickens and blue-eyed rabbits were very cheap. Each long-tailed chicken only costs 1 silver coin. Each blue-eyed rabbit only costs 3 silver coins. Zhao immediately decided not to buy these animals from the spatial shop. It was too uneconomical. He only had a little over 200 gold coins left. If he were to buy from the space, he could only get a maximum of 2 rabbits or 3 chickens. But if he were to buy from the outside world, he could buy more than 2,000 long-tailed chickens or 800 or so blue-eyed rabbits. This would definitely fill up the ranch. Although he hadn't yet solved the problem about how to raise carnivorous predators, right now just establishing the ranch was fine. Zhao took a deep breath, and with a thought he exited the ranch and came outside. The place where Zhao came out was different. The last time, he came out into his room because that was where the teleport point was. But this time, he came out into the place where he had originally entered the space to bring in his undead and the plants that Green got for him. When he emerged, Zhao found Green and everyone else there. He was stunned. "Why are you all waiting for me?" Green obviously had a relieved expression on his face. "Master, you have been inside the space for over 4 hours." Zhao paused. He hadn't thought that he was inside the space for so long. Maybe it was because he had been sleeping, so he lost his sense of time. Zhao smiled, trying to reassure them. "There's no problem. In fact, something good happened. The space has leveled up. Let's all go into the space and you'll see what I'm saying." With a thought, several people entered the space. Everyone froze when they entered, not because of any other reason than catching sight of the villa. Zhao smiled when he saw their reactions. "I bought this house from the space for 1 gold coin. Now we can all live here." Having said that, he led everyone into the house, then told them to select their own bedroom. Blockhead and Rockhead chose the 2 rooms downstairs, while Green and Mren chose their room upstairs, which Meg did as well. Once they had selected their rooms, Zhao said, "The space has a few new functions, but the one that we need the most is this." With a thought, They all came out of the space, but this time was a little weird because of where they found themselves. This didn't look like the manor and it obviously wasn't Stony Mountain. Green looked around, while Meg said with uncertainty, "Master, isn't this your room in the castle on Iron Mountain?" Zhao laughed. "Yes, this is my room. We have returned to the castle." Everyone froze. Then they rushed to the window, opening it. They looked outside and found that they really were back in the Iron Mountain castle. They all looked at Zhao in shock, who chuckled. "The space has a new capability that allows us to instantly transfer between 2 points. I have 2 teleport points. One of them is here in the castle, while the other is in the manor. Now we can move between the 2 locations at any time." Everyone still had a shocked look on their faces. They didn't think that it would be something this amazing. A journey that took them around 2 weeks could now be traveled in a moment. Zhao continued to tell them about the changes that happened when the space leveled up. While doing so, he led everyone to the castle square, where they entered the space again. Zhao chose to enter the space from the square because, in the future, when he returned all the slaves back to the castle, he didn't want them to come out into his room. Once everyone went back into the space, Zhao took them to the ranch to have a look around. When he told them they would be able to raise a lot of spirit beasts here, they were all happy. If they could raise spirit beasts, it would become another source of income. Once Zhao finished explaining the new features, they all left the space, but not before Zhao took out 100 gold coins and gave them to Green. Tomorrow, Green will go to Kosa City and buy 300 blue-eyed rabbits. Chapter 88, Back to the Castle. This chapter was sponsored by Dylan L., Australia, Cody L., US, David F., US, and Raymond R., US. Thanks you guys. Green was excited to learn that the gold coins from inside the space could now be taken out, since this was the feature that he was most concerned about. He knew that the space was mainly used for farming, and not very good for fighting. But there was a problem with farming when you harvest the crops too frequently. For instance, if Zhao planted nothing but radishes for 1 year, he feared that it would take a decade for everyone in the continent to eat all the radishes. Such a high yield was too much. It would greatly impact the market in the continent. Trying to sell that many radishes would be a problem, but that wasn't the same as selling the radishes inside the space. Although they wouldn't be able to get as much gold coins, they didn't have to worry about no one wanting to buy the radishes. What was most important was that the gold coins could now be taken out of the space, that they could use the gold coins as hard currency to buy anything. After resting for 1 night, the next morning, Green was on his way to Kosa City. This time they didn't conceal the fact that Green was going to buy something. Once Green was gone, Zhao went to the manor's yard. He got ready to move the slaves back to Iron Mountain Castle. Yesterday, Zhao had discussed this with Green, and he agreed. After all, the estate was small and too close to Kosa City. It was time to go back to the castle. Anyway, the castle was like their roots. They had to go back sooner or later. And now, with the stones from Stony Mountain, not only could they make millstones, but they could also fix up the castle. Although the castle wasn't that damaged, after so many years it would inevitably be falling apart in some places. Mining from Iron Mountain wasn't very convenient, but now they had these stones from Stony Mountain. Of course, if they wanted to continue to keep people away from Stony Mountain, they had to maintain the spell that covered the mountain in a blanket of darkness. Drunk had told Zhao that once they left, the darkness spell would lose its effect, allowing people to see the manor. Zhao didn't want that, so he planned to leave 2 of the black mages behind. Zhao counted on these 2, Scales and Brick, to defend Stony Mountain. He allowed them to lead 100 undead. This should be sufficient if anything were to happen. As long as they could block the enemy for a while, Zhao would be able to come with reinforcements. The remaining 6 undead black mages were going to follow Zhao back to the castle. He planned to leave 2 of them to guard the castle, while the other 4 would go into the carrion swamp and capture undead spirit beasts. Now that the ranch was opened, he would be able to keep any kind of spirit beast, which would help him form an army. Only after establishing an army of spirit beasts would Zhao dare to start cultivating the land in the Black Waste. Otherwise he wouldn't have the guts. As of now, Zhao was preparing to take Blockhead and Rockhead to the castle in order to manage the slaves and protect them. But Zhao was going to stay behind on Stony Mountain. He wanted to wait until Laura came back. Although he could now take gold coins out of the space, the amount of gold he would get for the crops was too little. It wasn't cost-effective. That was why he needed Laura's cooperation. Zhao started working. He first had to organize the slaves before sending them back to the castle. This wasn't hard to do because the slaves had already grown accustomed to the space. Once they were all inside the space, Zhao said, "Let me tell you one thing. From the space, we can now directly go to the castle in Iron Mountain, where you will build millstones and repair the castle." The slaves were in a daze while watching Zhao, not understanding what he meant. Zhao looked at them, then continued, "Simply put, the space is like a room with two doors. One door leads to Stony Mountain, while the other door will take you to Iron Mountain. Any questions?" The slaves didn't have much of a reaction. They had always felt that the space was magical, so it didn't seem strange for it to have this ability. It was silent. Zhao couldn't help but think that their reaction was too calm. With a wry smile, he shook his head, then led Mren and Meg, 6 black mages, Blockhead and Rockhead, and the slaves back to Iron Mountain Castle. Everyone came out of the space and stepped onto the castle square, which was where Zhao put the teleport point. Once they were out, Zhao took out the stones from Stony Mountain for the slaves to work with. He also took out some food that Mren made with Meg's help, along with some supplies for living, like blankets. Right now Scales, Brick, and 100 undead were waiting at Stony Mountain for Green to come back from Kosa City. It shouldn't take more than 2 days. Enough time to settle things here in the castle. They had been gone from the castle for 20 days. Not much had changed except for the amount of dust. After a quick cleaning, the slaves made themselves busy under Anne's leadership. They mounted the stone discs together with the wood from the oil fruit tree. The wood was very strong, and after the space leveled up, it was even better. But because of the high oil content in the wood, it was very flammable. However, Zhao wasn't worried about that because there was a moat going around the castle. There was no need to worry about a fire. Although no one here had full smithing and carpentry skills, making the millstone itself wasn't that difficult. It didn't require too many technical details. You just needed to grind down the stone and stick the wood in. Anyone could make it if they were strong enough. Once the slaves started working, Zhao went to find Mren. "Grandma Mren, let's go to the valley and see if anything has changed." Mren was also curious about what happened to the corn, so she nodded. The two people went into the mountain, crossed the underground lake, and have now reached the valley. Zhao and Mren were surprised at what they saw. They didn't think that the corn would still be growing. Although the corn seedlings weren't very high, even looking somewhat weak, they were still alive. Looking at the seedlings on the 30 acres of land he had improved, Mren and Zhao laughed. After the attack from the army of spirit beasts, they felt like giving up. With the land paved with a layer of toxic soil, Zhao didn't feel too much hope that the corn seedlings would still grow. But now, he was sure that the earth below the toxic soil was still fertile from his land improvement, allowing the seedlings to survive. Ever since Zhao went on a journey to Kosa City, these seedlings could only fend for themselves. It seems like their vitality was very tenacious. Chapter 89, Minor Matters. These seedlings represented hope. Although they weren't growing well, they still showed a tenacious spirit since the layer of toxic soil didn't stop them from surviving. Zhao bent down and gently stroked one of the seedlings. It really looked like it lacked nutrition. To be honest, even if it were to grow up, it would be impossible for it to produce much food. Zhao slowly stood up, then turned around to face Mren. "Grandma Mren, I'm surprised that these seedlings are growing, but I think they need some water. Maybe it would help them grow a little better." Mren nodded and moved to Zhao's side, but before she could do anything, Zhao stuck out his ghost staff and showed water. He knew that the ghost staff could use all the features of the space, so he wanted to try to use it to release water. Sure enough, the voice came. "Portable cane has detected contaminated land. Do you wish to improve it?" Zhao said yes, which prompted the voice to say, Please select the number for improvement. A projected screen suddenly appeared in front of him showing rows of numbers, with units between 10 to 100. Zhao was stunned. He didn't think that he would be able to improve so much land. According to these figures, he could improve up to 100 acres, instead of the original 10 acres that he was limited to. It seems like the level up had given him more benefits than he realized. Zhao immediately chose the largest number, 100 acres. Once he finished, a surge of water rushed out of the cane and started flying into the sky. It looked like rain was going to fall onto the land. The moment the land turned wet, it started to change color. Marin also noticed this. She was surprised because the area of modified land seemed a bit too large, greatly exceeding the 10 acres of land Zhao said he could improve per day. Puzzled, she decided to ask Zhao, "Master, why is there so much water?" Zhao turned to Marin and smiled. When the space leveled up, the area of land improvement has also increased. Now I can improve up to 100 acres of land per day. Marin's face brightened. Looking at the 100 acres of land, she said, "This is great. Now it will only take 10 days to change all this land. Although it's a little late in the season, we should still be able to grow all kinds of stuff." Zhao nodded his head. Improving 100 acres of land per day would allow them to make full use of this valley. He thought about what they could do with 1,000 acres of fertile land. He still wanted to grow corn because then he wouldn't have to worry about running out of feed for the ranch. If he tried to raise 1,000 animals, then they would eat a lot per day. Right now Zhao was just planting corn because once the weather got cooler, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to grow any more corn out here until next year. Of course, when he couldn't grow corn, he could try planting some bamboo rice, which had a very high yield. Slowly, the rice would become their main source of food. With the food that Green had originally bought and the food that Zhao had grown, they would have enough to feed the Buddha clan for 10 years. It was precisely because of this that Zhao didn't worry about food. But that didn't mean he shouldn't grow some more. Once the food was placed in the space, it doesn't appear to rot, so it didn't hurt to try to store as much food as possible. After all, once they finished the deal with Laura's help, they might eventually buy some more slaves. More people would naturally eat more. Eventually, the amount of food that they had that could feed 100 people for 10 years might not last as long, so he's going to plant some more food. Not using this 1,000 acres of land would be too wasteful. If he planted some bamboo rice here, they would never have to worry about a food shortage. Once the land changed for the better, Zhao held up his staff, ready to plant some seeds. The staff had the power of the shovel, so he was able to dig up the rest of the land, which was about 70 acres. Like magic, the land was opened up without any effort. Then the corn seeds were planted. This staff really could use all the features of the spatial farm. It was then that Zhao suddenly remembered something. He had the farm tools, just like in the game, but where were his ranch tools? What was that about? Did he not reach some sort of requirement, so the tools were cancelled? Zhao wanted to go into the space and look. Things were finished here, so he decided to forget the valley for now and go back to the castle. Marin naturally didn't know what Zhao was thinking, but when he said that he was returning to the castle, she didn't stop him. She wanted to go back herself. As they traveled over the water, Zhao thought about giving some more wood from the oil fruit trees to Daisy and Anne in order to make a boat. He couldn't just tell Marin to help him over the lake every day. Previously, he wanted a weed boat because they didn't have any wood. But now that they had some, they could begin to slowly learn how to build wooden boats. Anyway, it wasn't like there were waves in the underground lake, so at least a raft would be sufficient. They returned to the castle. By now the slaves had already settled in. It was time for Zhao and Marin, along with Meg, to go back to Stony Mountain. But before they left, Zhao gave some alfalfa seeds to the slaves and told them to plant some on the mountain. When you harvest alfalfas, not only could these crops be used as feed for the animals, they would also help fertilize the mountain. After explaining this to the slaves, Zhao went to meet Drunk and the other black mages. 2 of them, Punch and Rash, will be staying here with 100 undead to guard the castle, while Drunk and the other 3 will be going into the Carrion Swamp to catch some spirit beasts. The Carrion Swamp was a place where people would never go, but Drunk and the Black Mages were undead, so they were able to fit right in. But before they went, Zhao properly gave them instructions to mainly stay in the outer perimeter of the swamp and to not go too deep. If anything goes wrong, immediately come out. Zhao didn't want any losses to occur. Even though Drunk and the rest were undead, they were still Zhao's summons and a very large part of his fighting force, so he didn't want to lose them to the carrion swamp. But although they were Zhao's summons, the undead black mages were highly intelligent and they had gone through many battles in the continent over the years. Except for going against the Xenia clan and Zhao, they had never lost, so it could be said that their combat experience was considerably higher than Zhao's. However, they didn't say anything as they seriously listened to his words. Zhao was their master. No matter what, they had to listen to him. Once he was done talking, Zhao released some undead that they could ride, which was very convenient. In addition to those were some humanoid undead that would protect them. Originally, they weren't that powerful, but after the space made them stronger, they could now act as guards. Chapter 90, Magic Beach. Once everything in the castle had been arranged, Zhao, Mren, and Meg went back to Stony Mountain, although there wasn't much to do but wait until Green came back. But there was one thing Zhao was interested in: finding the people who moved against them. Until now, there were little clues as to who attacked them. The existence of these individuals were a big threat, so Zhao wanted to find them. It was certain that the forces behind Drunk and the Black Mages were powerful. Because of this, he wanted to know who they were. Such people were like a bomb that you didn't know when it would explode. To check up on things, Zhao had the 2 teleport points, which allowed him to easily move back and forth between the 2 places, like going from your front yard to your backyard. This was convenient, but in fact, Zhao preferred to stay in the space. The space has a hot spring and his villa, plus it has the screen that allowed him to see and hear what was going on in either the manor or the castle, so he didn't actually need to run back and forth. After Zhao first took Mren and Meg to take a quick look around Stony Mountain and finding nothing of note, they returned to the villa. Back in the space, Zhao had things to do. It wouldn't be long before he had to harvest the oil fruit trees, but as for the other 8 acres, he decided to plant different things. 2 acres of cucumbers, 2 acres of peas, 2 acres of pumpkins, and 2 acres of radishes. When the space leveled up, Zhao got some radish seeds from the radishes, so he decided to use the last 2 acres to see how many radishes those seeds could produce. Once he was done, he couldn't just do nothing and stare at the crops, so before long he was inside the living room of his villa, looking at the spatial barns page on his screen. He found that he really had a lot in his inventory: oil fruit seeds, wild fruit trees, corn, wheat seeds, rice bamboo seeds, hawthorn trees, barbed vines, magic beach seeds. Magic beach seeds? What's that? Zhao's hand made a move and 2 small bags appeared in his hand. A tone chimed and the voice came: magic peaches are a magic crop. Reaching level 10 gives you 2 bags. Each bag has 1 magic peach seed. 1 acre of land is needed to plant 1 peach seed. Magic peaches can heal the wounded and instantly restore a mage's magic. Magic peach pet can also get a war pet from any category. Blood is needed for the pet to recognize the host. Once host is considered the owner, it's non-changeable. Magic peach is a proprietary spatial crop. It cannot be taken out of the space. Zhao stared blankly as he listened to the voice. These benefits had shocked him. It can heal wounds and also restore magic, but the most important was that the pit of the magic peach could get you a war pet. This was great. Most people in the continent didn't have war pets. Some would have mounts, but that wasn't the same as a pet. Owners and their war pets have a stronger bond, which is usually formed under the blood pact law. They would give their blood and vitality to form a contract with a spirit beast, and that beast would become their war pet. But there was a downside. The stronger the war pet was, the more vitality you had to pay. So not many people could hope to get a powerful war pet. After all, their life was more important. Everybody wanted a war pet, but because of various restrictions they couldn't get one. If the people in the continent knew about this magic peach, they would go mad trying to take it. As Zhao held the magic peach seed bags in his hands, he couldn't help but laugh. With this, their combat effectiveness would enhance even more. Mren and Meg were in the villa, and were alarmed when they heard Zhao's laugh. They ran to find him, not knowing what he was laughing about. Puzzled, Mren went around him and asked, "Master, what are you so happy about?" Zhao looked at Mren and smiled. "Grandma Mren, do you want a war pet?" Mren nodded, naturally knowing how helpful a war pet was for an expert. "Of course, I think everyone in the continent wants a war pet." Zhao shook the bags in his hands with a smile. "Inside of these are 2 magic peach seeds that the space gave me as a reward. It takes 1 acre of land to plant 1 magic peach seed, but once it grows into a magic peach, the fruit of the peach can instantly heal your wounds and restore your magic." But that isn't the most important part. The most important thing is that the magic peach pit can help you get a war pet. Just infuse the pit with a drop of your blood and that pet will belong to you, always following you into a fight. Although Zhao awkwardly explained this, Mren understood what he meant. Mren and Meg stared at the incredible bags in Zhao's hands. If it weren't for the recent magical changes around here, they wouldn't have believed what Zhao said. This was too amazing, right? How could there be such a fruit? With uncertainty, Mren asked, "Master, can this magical fruit really do all of that?" Zhao smiled. "I don't know. That's just what the space said. After all, I have not planted this yet. I'll be ready to once I harvest some of the crops. Then I would have the 2 acres of land I need to plant these 2 seeds, and see if they are really that amazing." Mren's face was flushed with excitement. "It's certainly possible. The space has never fooled us before. I hope so. If the magic peach can do all of that, then later you will have your very own war pet." Zhao laughed. Mren and Meg were very pleased with this. It was the dream of every strong person in the continent to have a war pet, and now they had hope of obtaining one, so they were certainly happy. Zhao opened the bag and poured the seeds out. There was nothing strange about the seeds. They looked very ordinary. Zhao looked over the peach seeds several times, but he couldn't find anything special about them. He put them back in their bags, and with a wave of his hand, they moved back into the barn. Mren and Meg was staring at the bags until they disappeared. Then they withdrew their eyes. Mren turned around and looked out at the radishes growing outside. "I hope I can see the magic peach as soon as possible." "Okay, just wait until I have to harvest, then I will plant those 2 magic peach seeds," Zhao said. Chapter 91, Radish Seeds. Mren and Meg liked to stay inside the space. It was like paradise, especially with the recent discovery that they had made. They found out that when they practiced magic inside the space, their training speed was actually faster than practicing magic outside. This was first discovered by Meg. Meg was a 6th level mage, so there was room for improvement. She had been in the space before, but she couldn't practice magic back then because she was too busy. There was just no time to practice magic until now, which allowed her to notice that her magic training speed was faster than before. Feeling this difference, she told Mren about it. Mren didn't practice that much magic anymore. She was already a powerful mage at the 8th level, so she had already reached a bottleneck. Even if she were to practice magic, in such a short time, it would be impossible to break through. Now she was so busy with many other things, she didn't have time to practice magic, and naturally she didn't discover the difference in training speed in the space. It was only when Meg told her about it that she decided to test it out, and found that her magical training speed really was much faster in the space than outside, at least by half. Meg also told this to Zhao, but it wasn't like he could understand it. He couldn't practice magic, so this discovery didn't give him that much of an impact. As long as Mren and Meg enhanced their strength, it was good enough for him. Eventually, the crops started to mature. It wasn't the radishes, but the peas that matured first. The peas only took 18 hours to ripen, which Zhao didn't expect to be that fast. He immediately harvested the peas. Not only were peas good to eat, but they could also be used as seeds. However, Zhao didn't plant any more peas for now. Once he harvested the peas, he had 2 empty acres of land. Without the needing to think about it, he planted the 2 magic peach seeds. After all, those things were really useful. Since there was only 1 magic peach seed in each acre of land, most of the land was now empty, so Zhao tried to plant some corn seeds in that acre. The result was that the corn seeds withered the moment it was planted. Now that the magic peach seed had been planted, that acre of land became precious. No one dared to walk over it, afraid that stepping on the ground would affect the growth of the magic peach. So whenever they got near that acre of land, they would take a detour around it. 2 hours after planting the magic peach seed, the radishes have matured. For some reason, the radish seeds that he had gained from the radishes took 20 hours to mature. But when Zhao harvested the radishes, he felt a burst of pleasure. In total, he was able to gain 160,000 kati of radishes. That means he was able to harvest 80,000 kati of radishes per acre. Now that he had harvested the radishes, he wanted to see how much radish seeds he was able to get. Zhao couldn't help but laugh when he discovered that he was able to gain 2,000 kati worth of radish seeds from those 2 acres. It seems that now he would never have to worry about running out of radish seeds. 2 hours later, the pumpkins had matured. Once he put the pumpkins in the barn, he planted some radishes where the pumpkins used to be, and eventually, he harvested the cucumbers, which took 28 hours to mature. In the meantime, he had already harvested the oil fruits. Checking his inventory, Zhao saw that he had 150 gold coins, 2 acres worth of cucumbers, 2 acres worth of peas, 2 acres worth of pumpkins, 2 acres worth of broccoli, 2 acres worth of cabbages, 2 acres worth of eggplants, 2 acres worth of wheat, and all the radishes that took 8 acres to grow. Plus he had some oil fruits that he had harvested 15 times, and corn which he had harvested 28 times. Zhao wasn't going to use the corn as animal feed, at least not directly. Once they use a millstone, they would soon be able to start processing the corn. And once the corn was processed, they would be able to obtain some corn bran. That bran will be used as animal feed, along with radish leaves and the leftover fruit they would get after pressing the oil fruits. This should be enough to feed the spirit beasts. Although there were no spirit beasts in the space yet, he would soon have some. 300 blue-eyed rabbits was not a small number. He remembered from playing the game that an ordinary rabbit would consume about a pound worth of feed every 2 hours. The blue-eyed rabbits from the Ark continent was probably a similar creature, but Zhao didn't know how much these rabbits would eat, and could only wait until Green gets back to find out. At least he had a lot of radish leaves. That should be enough to last for a while. And once the slaves finished planting the alfalfa seeds on Iron Mountain, they could then start processing the corn, which would give him more animal feed. Also, after Laura helps them sell the radishes, they would be able to buy an oil press. Once the oil is pressed from the oil fruits, the leftover fruit could also be used as animal feed. Anyway, Zhao wasn't ready to raise a lot of spirit beasts. He wanted to leave some vacancies just in case there were some spirit beasts that he wanted to grab. After he finished harvesting, Zhao felt bored, so he went to check up on things with the screen. He first looked around the castle. Needless to say, the male slaves were busy repairing the castle walls, while the female slaves were arranging to go plant the alfalfa seeds. Zhao was very satisfied with this. The castle walls didn't have any magic protection, so its defensive capabilities was very limited. But it was better to repair it than not to. As for the alfalfa seeds, growing alfalfa wasn't simple, but neither was it complicated. Just dig a small hole in the ground and plant the seed, then pour a little water. Also, make sure that the mountain was clear of weeds. Otherwise they would compete with the alfalfa. The weeds that had been cleared away shouldn't be wasted. Daisy would prepare the weeds to make some mats. In addition to that, she hasn't stopped her research on building a cocoon boat, though this time she was using wood. However, they had to do things step by step. Right now their main job was to plant the alfalfa seeds. The seeds were very small, but because Green wanted to improve the land on Iron Mountain, he bought a lot of them. Their time was taken up with planting alfalfa seeds, weaving straw mats, and researching how to make a cocoon boat. Looking at the castle, Zhao didn't see anything wrong, so he decided to link with Drunk. By now Drunk had entered the carrion swamp, but only the outer perimeter. He and the other black mages have not encountered any powerful spirit beasts yet. It was only through the space that he was able to communicate with Drunk. The range from the teleport point didn't reach the swamp, so Zhao couldn't see what was going on over there. Only by getting answers to his questions did he understand the situation. Drunk seems to have listened to his words. They didn't hurry inside, and was only exploring the edge of the carrion swamp. Not finding anything wrong, Zhao felt relieved. He then switched the screen to look at Stony Mountain, where scales and brick were. Everything seemed calm. Nothing was happening other than the undead gathering the stones. Bored, Zhao paddled his finger over the remote's touch screen, until he noticed something on the big screen that caught his attention. Chapter 92, Raising Firefish. Zhao noticed something about the ditch in the manor's yard. It wasn't the hot spring water that caught his attention, but the small firefish. He hadn't paid attention to these fishes before because he had been busy recently and the number of fish was too small to care about. However, when he inadvertently moved the image on the screen, he saw one of the firefishes jump out of the hot water, which attracted his attention. This made him remember what Green told him about the fish. Not only were they delicious, but also very expensive. Back then, Zhao wasn't at level 10, and so he hadn't established his spatial ranch yet. That was why he didn't take any special notice of these fish. But with his ranch now opened, he could now raise animals. Even though his ranch didn't have a fish pond, he still had a hot spring in his space that could support these small firefish. Although he didn't know yet if these firefish could be raised in his spatial hot spring, it didn't hurt to try. If it worked, they would have another source of income, but if it didn't, then their only loss would be losing a few small fishes. With this thought, Zhao appeared in the yard of the manor. He walked quickly to the ditch and stood on the edge. The firefish were just leisurely swimming around. Zhao smiled. Then he reached into the ditch. Suddenly, a spatial hole opened. Hot spring water, along with some fish, fell into the space. The moment the firefish entered the space, the voice came and said, "Discovery of aquatic organisms. Needs special water quality requirements. Contains edible, delicate meat. Disadvantages its small size. Improving fish. Analyzing data of fish. You can now purchase these fish in the shop. Needs 15 hours to reach maturity. Each fish can only reproduce 8 times. Each reproduction cycle will produce 30 baby fishes every 8 hours. Fish requires feed every 4 hours. Hot spring in the farm will become their special habitat. You can now use your ranch tools." At that moment, Zhao felt like jumping for joy, but before he did, the voice came again. Connection to ranch tools successful. Net tool can capture target organisms. Ranch is required to reach level 10 before the net can be fully effective outside the space. If the net is currently used outside the space, it will only have a 10% probability of capture. Fly swatter tool has a one-hit kill ability. Ranch is required to reach level 10 before the fly swatter can be fully effective outside the space. If the fly swatter is currently used outside the space, it will only have a 10% probability of a one-hit kill. Attack range cannot exceed the monitoring range. Command function is set. This feature allows for all creatures inside the space to obey the command of the host. Feed conversion function is set. Host can now designate which crops will turn into feed. After the voice finished speaking, Zhao stepped back into the space. However, he didn't see any fish swimming around in the hot springs. He decided to open the barn, and sure enough, there was a new image of a firefish. It said that he only had 5 small firefish. Zhao immediately put the firefish into the hot springs. Although the temperature of the water was high, it seemed to have little impact. In fact, the fish seemed to be swimming around cheerfully. Going back to the barn, Zhao took a look to see what he could convert into feed. There were some radish leaves. Because he had been harvesting a lot of radishes, he ended up with so many radish leaves. They had been useless until now. Zhao directly converted the radish leaves into animal feed and delivered them to the hot springs. He really wanted to see what the feed would look like. The radish leaves turned into something red. Zhao couldn't help but feel surprised as he slowly walked to the hot springs. Swaying in the water were some beautiful, fiery red plants. The firefish swam around constantly, but occasionally they would eat one of these plants. Seeing this, Zhao understood that these plants were the feed. Zhao had just finished when Mren and Meg came out from the villa. They went up to him, but before they said anything, they saw that something was different with the hot springs. Before, there was no life, but now there were fishes and plants. Such a change caused the two to look puzzled. Mren was curious, so she asked, "Master, what's going on?" Zhao gave a slight chuckle. "Nothing. I just bought a few small firefish from the manor, and these red plants are the feed for these fish." When she heard what Zhao said, Mren couldn't help but feel surprised. She turned around and looked at the hot springs again, but this time she was overjoyed. "This is great. You can raise firefish here. This will become another source of income." "Ah, yes. But that's not the best part. I forgot to tell you that these small firefish will grow into big fish in 15 hours. Then they will reproduce and make 30 baby fishes, once every 8 hours. They can do this 8 times. Mren was amazed at this. Everyone in the continent knew that firefish were very difficult to raise. Even if there was a hot spring, it wasn't easy to raise these fish in large quantities. It was precisely because of this that firefish were very rare. They weren't just difficult to support because they only grow in hot springs. It was also because they were very picky about their food. There were many things that they didn't eat or would make them sick. That was why there weren't that many firefish being raised. One of the reasons these fish were able to survive in the manor was because there were very few people around. But the most important reason was because of the trees. Although the firefish were very picky, the roots of this tree was one of things they eat. Since the trees were large, their hairy roots were long enough to reach into the ditch, becoming food for the fish. However, during the winters, a lot of the fish would still die, either because of the cold or because the trees didn't provide enough nutrients. Only a few fish had managed to survive. Because of the difficulty of raising firefish, not many merchants were able to sell this fish even though they were worth a lot of money. A single firefish had a minimum price of 2 gold coins. Not many people could afford this price, and even if you could afford them, any firefish will go directly to royalty or nobility. If oil fruits and bamboo rice were one of the favorite foods of commoners, then firefish were one of the favorite foods of the aristocracy. So no matter how much firefish you had, you didn't have to worry about no one buying it. Zhao didn't quite know this, but Mren knew. Firefish would make them money faster than selling radishes or oil from the oil fruits. It was because she understood this that Mren was so happy that the firefish could be raised inside the space. She had only heard of a few places on the continent that could raise firefish, and they were able to make a fortune. The previous owner of the manor probably tried to make his own fortune off of these small firefish, but then gave up when he couldn't raise enough. Looking at these firefish in the hot springs, Mren felt happy. This is really great. As long as we raise these firefish, we won't have to worry about money. Chapter 93, Tracking the Enemy. Zhao smiled. Grandma Mren, I'm not ready to raise so much firefish. If we sell so much fish in the market, wouldn't that make them worthless? Zhao's words was like a bucket of cold water, cooling Mren's enthusiasm instantly. However, it was for a different reason. Zhao didn't want to flood the market with firefish because it would affect the price, but Mren was thinking of how it would affect the Buddha clan. If people found out that their clan could raise firefish in large quantities, she feared that the temptation to hunt the Buddha clan for this method would be too great. Mren scowled. Master, what you say is true, but the most important is that we must not let people know the relationship between the firefish and the Buddha clan. Otherwise we would be finished. Those old nobles would want to use these fish as their own money-making tool. We must be careful. Zhao nodded. Do not worry, Grandma Mren. I'll be careful. Everyone only knows me by my black mage identity, so no one would suspect the Buddha clan. And I have drunk catching spirit beasts in the carrion swamp, so pretty soon the black waste will be safer. Mren nodded, then sighed. In the continent, you can't do anything without money. Even the old nobility are always thinking of ways to make more money. Maybe it's a good thing that our Buddha clan was banished to the Black Waste. At least we could hide there. As long as we don't let people know that we can raise firefish, we should be safe. Yes, it's best that we make everyone forget our existence. Zhao said. They talked for a while longer before returning to the villa to rest. After checking that there was nothing to worry about in the two places, Zhao decided to stay in the space. Zhao really liked staying inside the space. 1. Because the design of the villa was a lot like those on Earth. It felt very comfortable living there. And 2. The space was completely in his control, so he never felt weak. The space never went from light to dark. The sky was always the same color. If Zhao wanted to know if it was dark outside, he had to use the screen's monitoring system. In the evening, Zhao called in Blockhead and Rockhead to rest in the villa. As for the slaves, they were left in the castle, where there was enough food, drink, and firewood. In fact, the slaves preferred sleeping at the castle. Although the space was very comfortable, they didn't like the idea of sleeping next to Zhao. They never knew if when they were sleeping, Zhao would be awake or not, which made their hearts feel a lot of pressure. At this moment, the castle was more comfortable. For some time now, while he was staying inside the space, Zhao had been paying attention to the magic beech tree. Fortunately, the growth of the tree was very satisfactory. This beech tree was different from the ones in Zhao's past life. It wasn't very tall, but the whole tree looked like it was carved out of a beautiful crystal. Mran and Meg had also been paying attention to the magic beech tree. For them, it was something really important. In the evening, Zhao harvested some radishes. By now he had about 14 acres worth of radishes. Once Laura gets back, he should have more than enough to sell. As of now, the only way to make money was with the radishes, firefish, and oil fruits, and also, the magic peaches if they ever decide to sell it. Zhao made some calculations. Because the oil from the oil fruits were cheap and had a high demand, the sale of the oil would be steady. The firefish were the most valuable, but Zhao was only willing to sell them in small amounts, otherwise it would draw too much attention to them. As for the radishes, they could sell them to the general public. Although they were magic vegetables, even commoners would be able to buy them a couple of times. But most of the radishes would be sold to nobles and merchants. It wasn't like commoners could afford to eat magic radishes every day. However, while he could sell more magic radishes than firefish, he still couldn't sell too much, otherwise it would have a large impact on the radish market, and he himself would have to suffer a loss in profits. Zhao was sitting beside the magic beech tree when his soul fluctuated. Suddenly, Brick's voice appeared out of nowhere. "Master, there's trouble in Stony Mountain." Zhao froze. Then he put up the screen to look at them. The black mages wouldn't have reported to him unless the people that have been watching them have made their move. It seems like their enemies have finally run out of patience. "Is your report accurate?" Zhao asked at once. "Accurate," Brick said. "They're moving towards Stony Mountain, and will be here by tomorrow night." Zhao nodded. "How strong are they?" 3 mages, 3 advanced level warriors, 300 mid-level warriors, and 100 assassins. Among the 3 mages is a light mage. "Light mage?" Zhao murmured. "I never thought that these guys would bring a light mage. It seems like they have taken great pains to build up their forces." There was a saying on the continent, a light mage was a black mage's greatest nemesis. If there was a black mage in a group of people, he would be an outcast. But if a light mage was in a group of people, he would be popular. Light mages usually wore a neat white robe while always having a smile on his face. His Worm's hands would cast dazzling light spells that can heal people's wounds and attack their enemies. They were known as the perfect mage. Zhao didn't know if it was true that light magic could restrain black magic. If a light mage was at the same level as a black mage, then the black mage would certainly suffer. But that should only be when they were at the same level. 2 of the 5 elements were water and fire. In nature, water can overcome fire, but a glass of water cannot extinguish a car on fire. That may be so, but it has been recognized on the continent that the best way to deal with a black mage was with light spells. Even if the light mage wasn't at a high level, he would certainly bring a great deal of trouble to a black mage. Since Zhao's identity was a black mage, it was the correct decision to bring a light mage to deal with him. From this point, it seemed like the other side really wanted to take Zhao down. They had brought 3 mages, 3 advanced level warriors, 300 mid-level warriors, and 100 assassins. The fighting strength of this team of people would certainly not be weak. Even if the undead mercenary group were to encounter them, they would take a detour to avoid them. But Zhao wasn't afraid. To him, only the light mage was trouble. But he had to be ready. He wasn't stupid enough to just wait around. After all, offense was the best defense. This was also an opportunity. Zhao had to show them who they were dealing with. If the enemy didn't respect them, there would be no end to what they might do. Chapter 94, Ambush. Zhao told Brick to find out more about their forces, but the undead black mage said, "Master, that's not going to be easy. The other party has a large number of assassins, and since I don't look like I'm alive, I fear that I won't be able to sneak into their camp." Zhao nodded. "Well, just make sure to tell me the place where they settle down tomorrow." Brick obeyed, and suddenly there was an absence of sound. Zhao immediately went into the villa and cried out, "Grandma Mren, Grandma Mren." Mren was resting, but when Zhao called, she quickly rushed towards him. "Master, what is it?" Meg also came out of her room when she heard the sound. Her meditation was interrupted by Zhao's shouting. Meg was trying to accelerate the speed in which her strength increased, so she would have more power to protect Zhao. When Zhao saw Mren, he greeted her and said, "Grandma Mren, I just received a message from one of the black mages. There's an army coming towards Stony Mountain. 3 mages, one of which is a light mage, 3 advanced level warriors, 300 mid-level warriors, and 100 assassins are going to attack the estate tomorrow night." Mren's face had a shocked expression. Her eyes flashed. "Can you find out who they are?" Mren, of course, had often followed Adam's father into the battlefield. Even if she had a good temper, if someone wanted to mess with them, she would not stand for it. It would not do you any good to offend an 8th-level mage. Zhao shook his head. "No, because there are assassins. Brick can't move too close. Since he's an undead, it would be impossible to mix in with their group. But even though it's difficult to find out who these forces are, I told him to pay attention to their movements. I want to know where they will settle down so we can ambush them tomorrow." Mren paused for a moment, thinking over what Zhao said. Then she nodded. "That's a good idea, but now our strength is too weak. I think you should call back Drunk and the other black mages from their job. We'll need all the help we can get by tomorrow." Zhao agreed. Then he thought of something and his face changed. "Grandma Mren, what about Grandpa Green? Won't they have sent people to deal with him? He doesn't know what's happening right now." Mren smiled. "Master doesn't need to worry. There's a reason that old man has survived for so long. Rest assured, he will come back once he felt better." Zhao said, "Well, I'll go call the black mages back and bring the slaves into the space. Tell them to come back immediately. We need to prepare," Mren said. Zhao nodded. "I will gather everyone." "Grandma Mren, you go meditate." Mren turned to go back to her room, where she prepared herself properly so that she would be in her best condition for battle. Zhao sent Drunk a message. As for the slaves, he didn't immediately bring them into the space, choosing to wait until the next day since he didn't wish to disturb their night's rest. Staying in the castle was safe enough for now. The next morning came. Zhao got Blockhead and Rockhead to organize the slaves and bring them into the space. At noon, Zhao received some news. Brick had told him that the enemy had set camp in a canyon south of Stony Mountain. Upon receipt of this message, Zhao told Brick to sneak back to the manor. After all, the enemy could have people watching over Stony Mountain. Assassins weren't weak, though what they learned was completely different than an average warrior would be taught. As well as martial arts that made their body light and one-hit kill techniques, they were also good at hiding their presence. Being adept at hiding one's presence meant studying the properties of darkness. Ever since Brick became an undead, his entire body had become one with darkness. It could be said that he could hide himself just as well as a trained assassin. He didn't even need to breathe. Once Brick was within range of the manor, a hole appeared, allowing Brick to enter the space. He saluted when he saw Zhao. Zhao waved back and said, while avoiding people, "How long do you think it'll take to get back to the canyon?" "Before dark," Brick said at once. Zhao nodded, then handed his ghost staff to Brick. "Take this staff and head on over to the canyon. Don't do anything after that." Brick obeyed. He held the ghost staff, which became half a meter long, then left the space. Once he was outside, he immediately started rushing towards the canyon. The ghost staff was one of the benefits of the level up. It was bound to Zhao and was impossible for others to use it. However, it didn't mean that Brick couldn't hold it while running around. Mren had been standing beside Zhao, and although she didn't understand why Zhao gave the staff to Brick, she didn't ask. She believed that Zhao knew what he was doing. Zhao went into the villa and turned on the screen in the living room. They were now able to see outside, but the image on the screen constantly kept changing. With what Mren knew about the laws of the space, the screen could only show an image within a 500-meter range from a center point. Because of this, the image on the screen generally doesn't move around that much. But now the image looked like it was in a hurry, proving that the center point to the space was mobile. Brick was moving fast, which they could clearly see on the screen. But he wasn't running in a straight line, and instead was moving around in a strange pattern. The route he chose would usually stop in places that were hard to see, like hidden areas with shadows that could cover his body. However, despite this, his speed was certainly not slow. As Brick moved around the mountains, the image on the screen shook a lot, making Zhao feel dizzy looking at it. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them, but he wasn't looking at the screen. Suddenly, he got up and walked out of the room. Mren followed him. "What is it, Master?" "It's nothing." Drunk and the other black mages just came back. "I didn't expect them to return that fast." The black mages had been exploring the outer perimeter of the carrion swamp when Zhao told them to return to the castle. Although he expected them to make it back in time, he didn't think it would be so quick. Without any hesitation, he pulled them into the space. However, they hadn't managed to capture any undead spirit beasts, so they weren't able to increase their army. Chapter 95, Once and for All. This chapter was sponsored by Brent T, Australia. I would like to thank this 3-time award-winning champion donator. Now was not the time for Zhao to ask Drunk about the situation in the carrion swamp. There were plenty of opportunities to ask something like that in the future, but now they had other matters to attend to. After more than 2 hours, Brick had reached the canyon. The canyon was a good location to make camp, a flat area between 2 mountains that had a small stream. Also, because of the flat terrain, this place made it difficult for people to hide and ambush them. But not for Zhao. Any place can become a place of ambush, since he could make his army instantly appear in a patch of the canyon. Zhao and Mren stepped out of the space and carefully looked over the canyon's terrain. They couldn't get a good look at the opposite party since there weren't any decent hiding places closer than this. This spot was their only option. Mren had a certain understanding of the battlefield. If this army was just made up of some random fighters, then with Zhao's power, they would be able to defeat them. But if this army was unified under the command of someone rich in battle experience, then exterminating them would not be so easy. Such a person would be difficult to deal with. After seeing the canyon, they returned to the space. They went to the living room in the villa to watch the screen. It was a good time, so Zhao then called Drunk to tell him what happened in the carrion swamp. The news that Drunk gave him disappointed Zhao a little, even though he expected it. Their job was just to explore the edge of the carrion swamp, so they didn't really gain any insights into the place, nor did they find any powerful undead or spirit beasts. Most importantly, they weren't able to get any plants. The area they were searching was like an enormous muddy pond that was difficult to walk in, slowing down their actions. The first layer of the carrion swamp was a lifeless marsh. Fortunately, the undead that came along with Drunk and the black mages, under Zhao's command, were born from the carrion swamp. The undead had been living in the swamp their entire life, to the point where they could move around by instinct. It was where they were born, grew up, died, and became undead. The carrion swamp was their home. That was exactly why the carrion swamp was a powerful place. The spirit beasts that died there became undead creatures that was able to slowly level up. The only other place in the continent that had such capabilities was deep magic. People believed that there was a devil in deep magic that was able to bring you back to life if you had a reason to continue living after you died. It was because the carrion swamp was a place that constantly produced undead that made it so strong. Since the carrion swamp was where you could turn dead animals into undead, and the fact that it has killed so many experts, it became known as a special place that was off limits. This was why Zhao told Drunk to be careful. They had to first explore the swamp to better understand it before stirring up trouble. Even though this time Drunk and the black mages didn't gain anything, next time they would prepare for a more in-depth look inside the carrion swamp. After Drunk told Zhao everything that happened, he put the black mages away, then quietly sat in the living room while watching the screen. But Mrin noticed that Zhao simply wasn't paying attention to what was happening on the screen, and was probably thinking over Drunk's words. Master, although Drunk didn't gain anything, at least they didn't suffer any losses. It's good enough that they survived the carrion swamp. There is a reason why it's worthy of being one of the 5 forbidden areas in the continent. No, I don't blame Drunk and the other black mages. They did a good job, Zhao said. I was just thinking of how big of a threat the carrion swamp is. If we want to create farmland and raise animals in the Black Waste, I would prefer if we could find some way to get rid of it. Mrin frowned. That is impossible. After so many years, no one has ever conquered the carrion swamp. That doesn't mean that we can't try. No one has ever really tried to conquer the carrion swamp because they didn't live near it like we do. So we have to try. Mrin understood what Zhao meant. The reason why no one has been able to conquer the carrion swamp was because, first, it was too dangerous, and second, no one lived near it. It wasn't like the carrion swamp would ever be a threat to them. They didn't have to suffer through any painful experiences from it. But the Buddha clan was different. If they couldn't handle the carrion swamp, then the Buddha clan would never develop. Armies of undead spirit beasts could just rush out of the carrion swamp, destroying everything in their path until there was nothing. It was the greatest threat to the Buddha clan. Blockhead and Rockhead had been quietly listening to what Zhao said. At one point, Blockhead couldn't help but say, Master, the carrion swamp is a big threat, but as long as we have the space, we will be safe. It's too dangerous to go to the carrion swamp. If we die, it doesn't matter, but if Master dies, we wouldn't be able to face our clan's ancestors. You have to be careful. Blockhead's tone was heavy. When she heard what he said, Mrin's face changed. Recently, because of Zhao's various fantastic accomplishments, she no longer worried about Zhao's safety. But Blockhead's words reminded her that Zhao was the last child of the Buddha clan. If anything were to happen to Zhao, then the Buddha clan would no longer exist. Zhao looked at Blockhead, and he couldn't help but give a wry smile. You think that I'm messing with the carrion swamp because I want to? The space won't protect us forever. Remember that I drank the water of nothingness. I can't learn magic or martial arts, and my body is weaker than the average person. If one day I were to get sick and die, or become old and die, do you think that the space will continue to exist? Once the space is gone, what else do you think the Buddha clan has that can resist the carrion swamp? From Zhao's words, everyone's face turned white. Zhao waved his hand and continued, the water of nothingness doesn't just affect me. My descendants up to 12 generations would also be unable to learn magic or martial arts. Once I am gone, I fear that it would be impossible for the Buddha clan to stop any spirit beast attacks. We need to resolve our situation with the carrion swamp once and for all. Mrin opened her mouth. She wanted to say something, but in the end she didn't say anything. What Zhao said was true. Zhao's amazing magical space was something the Buddha clan depended on. If one day it was really gone, then they would be finished. In Zhao's eyes, he wanted the Buddha clan to endure for generations. So they had to address the threat of the carrion swamp. Chapter 96, Renamed. Mrin was very clear on the fact that drinking the water of nothingness would make your body weaker than the average person. If Zhao were to die, then they would lose the space that the Buddha clan heavily relies on. What was most important was the undead from the carrion swamp and Drunk and the black mages. If the space were to one day disappear, would those guys disappear as well? Even worse, what if those guys didn't disappear and their evil nature was restored? That would be trouble. They had to pay attention to Zhao's safety, not only for the space, but also because he was the last child of the Buddha clan. If he weren't the only one, and there were actually many heirs, then they wouldn't pay that much attention to Zhao. It was tradition that only an heir could inherit the family name, and the nobles upheld tradition. As long as the family name could be passed along, and the clan remains a noble clan, then they could make a comeback one day. Because of Zhao's words, the people in the room didn't know what to say. Zhao looked at everyone and smiled a little. When he came to this world, he became Adam Buddha, the sole heir to the clan. If the Buddha clan wanted to develop, they had to rely on him and his future descendants. If he ever died, then they would need the support of his children. But Zhao didn't think that his children would inherit the space. If his children couldn't inherit the space, nor could they not learn magic and martial arts, then the Buddha clan would just be bullied until they were no more. Even if he had children, their young mentality might not be enough to figure out the problems of the Buddha clan. In fact, Zhao's mental age was around 30 years old. From his time on Earth, he didn't think like a child. He often thought about falling in love. Zhao fancied himself that one day he would have a wife and kids, living in a house with a white picket fence. But ever since he came to the Ark continent, he had been too busy to think about those things. He was no longer Zhao from Earth, but Adam Buddha, the sole heir to the Buddha clan. Not only did he inherit Adam's body, but also his responsibilities. It wasn't easy. There were enemies all around. They were surrounded by one of the continent's 5 forbidden areas, and from time to time there would be outbreaks of spirit beasts. Even though he had the space, he had to be careful. One wrong step and it would be over. As he looked at Marin, he didn't have the heart to tell her that, so he said, "Solving the Carrion Swamp crisis is not impossible. The reason that no one has conquered the Carrion Swamp after so many years is because they didn't have the space. The spirit beasts from the swamp may be powerful, but as long as they are captured by the space, then they will become loyal to us. As for the swamp's poisonous atmosphere, we don't have to worry about that. We just need to gather its toxic plants and slowly accumulate them so the spatial water could strengthen its detoxification effects. With this, we do not need to worry about the Carrion Swamp." It was like Marin was going through mood swings. Initially, she wasn't worried because she knew that Zhao had been leveling up the space, making it more powerful. But then she suddenly realized how big of a threat the Carrion Swamp was if Zhao were to die and the space were to disappear. Then finally, from what Zhao just said, even if she hadn't fully settled down, she still felt relieved. "It seems like you've developed a good plan. When Drunk and the Black Mages catch the powerful undead spirit beasts, the swamp's strength would gradually decline, while our strength will increase. In the future, maybe we can solve the problem of the Carrion Swamp. Yes, we can say that the Buddha clan has been forced to the end of its tether. If we cannot take root in the Black Waste, the Buddha clan will likely disappear, so we have to do everything we can to survive," Zhao said. Then he turned to Marin. "Grandma Marin, I thought it over, and starting today I will be renamed as Zhao Buddha. The Adam name is dead, so now call me Zhao." In his past life, he had been called Zhao for 3 decades, but after coming here, he was given the name Adam Buddha, even though he didn't want to be called by that name. Do not forget, it was a name he brought from Earth. In addition to the space, it was the only thing that connected him to his past life. Marin didn't react to the fact that Zhao wanted to change his name. As long as his surname remained the same, then it was fine. Marin had a lot of respect for Zhao, even more than Zhao's father. It was because of the space. She had never seen such a powerful ability before. Even though the space had no attack capabilities, with the space, no one would be able to harm Zhao. But there was something that Marin didn't find out. The space's mind control program. If there were people that were dead set against Zhao, like Blockhead and Rockhead, who had originally only listened to Green, the space would then make them respect Zhao. After all, they had watched as Zhao grew up into a troublemaker, and they treated him as such. But after entering the space, the way they thought of him became completely different. However, even if the space made them respect Zhao, it didn't take away their own independent thoughts. If they think that Zhao is doing something wrong, they will oppose him. They will not blindly respect him. It was precisely because of this that Zhao and everyone else hadn't discovered any abnormalities caused by the space. Marin nodded at the name change. "This is no big deal. Anyway, It's not like Master can walk around on the continent with the name Adam, so calling you Zhao is a good idea. Suddenly, something flashed on the screen, attracting Zhao's attention. Everyone looked at the screen, and they saw several of the assassins surrounding the canyon. It seems like the last of the enemy's army had finally arrived. Zhao carefully observed the assassins' actions. Although the screen only had a range of 500 meters, it still gave him a good look of the canyon. They looked like they were guarding the canyon from anyone who wanted to sneak past them. Zhao couldn't help but nod his head. Then he turned to Mren. This time we're dealing with people that are very careful. I better move Brick into the space, otherwise they might find him. Yes, these people are well organized, Mren said. Master, call Drunk and other black mages here as well. Let them get a good look at the people camped in the canyon. Zhao nodded. Then he called forth all the 8 black mages to him. They came to Zhao's side when they received his summons. Then after saluting him, they stared at the screen like Zhao told them to. The image on the screen changed. The assassins paused. Then they scattered around a brigade of troops that have just entered the camp. This brigade was mostly made up of warriors that were walking. Aside from them were 3 mages and 3 warriors riding on horses. One of the mages was dressed in a white robe. This robe was completely different from Zhao's black robe. It was gorgeous, had no hat, and it was silky smooth. Its white color shined with light under the afternoon sun. Along with the gorgeous robe, the light mage was holding a white staff that was studded with a huge transparent crystal that flashed the 7 colors of the rainbow whenever the sun shined on it. The light mage himself looked young, evidently only around 30 years old. He appeared to be kind with a gentle smile on his face, someone you could have a leisurely chat with. But Zhao had a different opinion. Chapter 97, Green Returns. This chapter was sponsored by Anna J., Poland. Thanks. Mren carefully looked at this man. The white robes obviously indicate him as a light mage, but he still looks like he's at a low level, probably just the 6th level. Everyone nodded. To tell the truth, this person didn't look like he could be compared to someone as strong as Mren. However, Drunk spoke up. This man is named Gurren, a light mage of the 7th level. 2 years ago, our group fought against him and suffered a small loss. Although he didn't do much better, he brought a team of 50 people that managed to injure us, but in the end, no one on his team was left alive, except for him. Not only is this guy a light-based mage with strong attack power, he's also skilled at summoning with light magic. He is very difficult to cope with. Zhao was surprised. He didn't expect that Drunk would know this person, so he quickly asked, "What is the origin of this person? Why did he fight you?" Drunk sneered. Light mages are hypocrites. They say that they're the voice of God and that light magic is the most valued out of all other magic, especially black magic. They use a variety of excuses to treat black magic as dirt. It was because of them that black mages on the continent are so unpopular. When we started robbing people, how could that self-righteous pompous guy miss the opportunity to show off against us? Zhao frowned. You've dealt with him before, and yet he seems to have the strength to provoke us. Do you know if he's gotten stronger? Drunk shook his head. I don't know, but I probably know who the 2 mages around Gurren are. Although I have never met them, from what I could see on the surface, I guess that these 2 are the Ji-Shi-Ling twins. Mren nodded. Yes. They look like them, although I have never seen their faces before. From their age and the way they're dressed, they are most likely the Ji-Shi-Ling twins. Zhao looked at Mren with a puzzled face. Grandma Mren, are the Ji-Shi-Ling twins strong? Very strong. They are both earth mages. Not only are they proficient in earth magic, they are also known to be able to summon a stone giant. Stone giants are earth creatures with a height of 8 meters. Their bodies are made of rocks, which they can also use as projectiles. The most important thing about these creatures is that as long as they don't leave the ground, their strength will never become weak. They are very difficult to deal with. Because these 2 brothers are very proficient in summoning, the Ji-Shi-Ling twins have become very famous. Zhao nodded. Then he looked at the 2 yellow robe mages. To be honest, they looked exactly like what Zhao thought a mage should look like. They weren't young, looking to be about 50 years old, with some gray hair and a very long beard. Their bodies were thin, giving people a scholarly feeling. It was like looking at two ancient people who have spent their whole lives doing nothing but learning. This was completely different from what the light mage looked like. In Zhao's eyes, Gurren didn't give him a good feeling. His boyish smile seemed too fake, the way he dressed was too smug. Everything about him made it seem like he was a liar. Even though the Ji Shiling twins were also Zhao's enemies, he at least got a good feeling from them. Zhao then turned to look at the other three men on horseback. They were certainly the three advanced warriors. Seeing these three men, Zhao's eyes couldn't help but shrink. These three were too strange. When you looked at them, you would get a cold feeling. And it wasn't because they were wearing black warrior clothes. It was something about their temperament. Zhao knew that this was their killing intent, but it was different from the killing intent coming off the soldiers. It was cold and strange. In the battlefield, the killing intent from the soldiers would be fair and upright, as high as a mountain and as wide as the sea. But these three, their killing intent didn't radiate as strongly as the soldiers, but more like a hidden snake slithering around. The danger you sensed from them felt disgusting. When Rin saw these three men, her face changed. Although she didn't know who they were, she felt that these three men were up to no good. Just then they all heard Shift, the undead assassin, say, "These three individuals are so strange. They actually seem very familiar, like we used to know them." Zhao paused when he heard what Shift said. Shift didn't seem like a liar. If he said that these three men gave him a familiar feeling, then he couldn't be wrong. It seems like he had dealt with these people before. Shift could very well solve the mystery of their origins. With him, they may get to the bottom of who these forces belong to. Zhao turned to Shift and asked, "Shift, do you remember anything?" But Shift shook his head. "No, I don't. But I feel as if I should know these three men. It's very strange." Zhao was disappointed, but he moved on. He turned to Drunk and said, "Drunk, carefully look at the camp. We're going to attack them tonight, so remember their positions, especially where the assassins are." Looking at these people, it was clear that the highest amongst them were the 6 people on horseback, but apparently they weren't commanding this army. The one in command seems to be a warrior wearing ordinary leather armor. He was around 40 years old with a weathered face, and he had the ability to keep this army well organized. Zhao felt like he was watching a movie on TV about someone bossing people around to build the camp. In the middle of the camp were 2 large tents, ready for the 3 mages and the 3 advanced warriors. Everyone else was living in small tents. As the camp was being built, suddenly there was a light coming from the middle of the camp. The light mage was whispering a spell as he waved the magic staff in his hand. A mass of white light erupted and spread out. Mrin was surprised as she saw what the man was doing. Emmanuel Ghost Probe? It turns out that he is actually an 8th level light mage. Zhao looked puzzled. "Grandma Mrin, what is this Emmanuel Ghost Probe?" The Emmanuel Ghost Probe is a special kind of light magic. It is specifically used to find creatures of darkness. It is very sensitive. As long as it has anything to do with dark magic, it will not escape detection. Only a light mage of the 8th level can cast this spell. Zhao looked at the screen and muttered, "It seems like it was a good idea to call Brick back, otherwise they would have found him." Mrin nodded. "Ah, yes. Even if you let Brick stay outside, he might have been able to escape those assassins' searches. After all, it would be impossible to look through all the mountains around the canyon. But it would be impossible for Brick to hide from the Emmanuel Ghost Probe. These guys are really cautious." Zhao's face grew heavy. "Yes, they are. Tonight's attack has to be successful. We can't let them prepare any more than this." He was about to continue, but then suddenly he received news of Green's return. Surprised, he immediately switched the screen to show the manor on Stony Mountain. When Zhao saw that Green was standing in the yard, he opened a hole to the space to allow him to step inside. When Green came into the space, they immediately greeted him. But then Mrin looked puzzled. "Did you buy any rabbits? Why did you come back empty-handed?" Green smiled. "Do not worry, I bought some rabbits. I just asked the people from the Marquee Company to help me with shipping them over. But on the way back, I found that someone was following me closely, which made me afraid that something may have happened back home. I came back as quickly as I could." "So, did anything happen?" They all gave Green a wry smile. Seeing the look they gave him, Green's face changed. What happened? Zhao told the situation to him. Then he switched the screen back to the canyon for Green to see. Green stared at the camp, his eyes flashing with coldness. Well, it seems like they're not afraid of death, Master. Tonight let's attack them. Zhao nodded. We feel the same way. This time the enemy is very strong. One is an 8th level light mage, and the other 2 are earth mages at the 7th level. There are also 3 advanced warriors, plus a few mid-level warriors and assassins. If we want to beat them, we have to try to find any clues that could help us. With that, Zhao moved the image on the screen to Gurren's tent. Chapter 98. Opposite, Gurren and the other mages were sitting in the tent. He was holding a book that looked very strange. It wasn't an ordinary book. The paper was made of sheepskin and the cover was made of metal that shined silver white. Other than that, the book didn't seem that important. It wasn't very thick, appearing to have only a total of 5 pages. Seeing this book, Green and Mrin both exclaimed, "The Iron Book?" Except for Zhao. Everyone else felt surprised when they heard what Green and Mrin said. They had a look of shock as they stared at the book in Gurren's hands. Zhao didn't know what this book was, but from everyone's reactions, he knew that it was important, so he quickly asked, "Grandpa Green, what is the Iron Book?" Green recovered from his shock, but his eyes still lighted up when he looked at that book. This book was created by a master alchemist. He spent nearly 2 decades making it out of special magical materials. These materials are so precious that even if you knew the method to make this book, it would be very difficult. Each of the pages of this book could be used to seal a magic spell. Once a magic spell is sealed in this book, you just need a little bit of magical energy to activate it, regardless of what rank it is. Zhao was surprised, but he understood at once what this could mean. This book was equivalent to a cannon with unlimited ammo. You just needed to press the button to launch it. As long as you had the strength to press a button, you would never run out of firepower. Once Green finished, Mrin gave a wry smile. "It seems like this time we will have to face something big. We don't know what level of magic is sealed in that book. If the level is high, then it would be trouble for us. We have to grab that book and gain its power for ourselves." Zhao nodded. Then he turned to Shift and said, "Shift, wait until evening to go to war. First, we have to deal with Gurren. Be sure to kill him. Remember that this guy is very cautious. You must be careful. There might be traps that he's come up with." Shift bowed, then said, "Yes, Master." Zhao then turned to Green and said, "Grandpa Green, our primary goal is Gurren. Make sure that he can't run. Since he has the Iron Book, he must be an important figure in the organization. We might find clues on his body." Green nodded. "Rest assured, Master, he will not escape." Zhao then looked at Meg, who was staring enviously at the Iron Book on the screen. "Meg, if you can get this Iron Book, it will belong to you." Meg was surprised for a moment. Then happiness formed on her face. "Really? You're not lying?" Zhao laughed. "I'm not lying to you. You are a 6th level mage, and you don't even have a magic staff. For now the Iron Book will be yours to use. That is until we have the opportunity to get you a magic staff." Meg grinned. "Well, I'll wait. But Master, if you're going to get me a magic staff, at least get me one like your ghost staff. It's beautiful and easy to use." Zhao laughed again. "When I get the chance, I will give you a handy magic staff." Zhao felt happy. If he didn't find these people, then their attack against him might have succeeded. But he was sure that even if these people's attack succeeded, he wouldn't suffer much of a loss, because he still has the space. Now that he had found these guys, they will not be able to run. Although their power was very strong, do not forget that their clan head wasn't that weak. It should be enough to deal with them. Most importantly, Zhao wanted to kill them all, then get drunk to turn them into undead. Even if they don't become high-level undead, he could just toss them into the space, and their power would be upgraded. He would then have an army of strong fighting men. Still, he hoped that there was some way to turn them into high-level undead so he could find out who is behind them in the end. With this thought, Zhao couldn't help but turn to Drunk and asked, "Drunk, is there any way for you to turn Gurren into a high-level undead?" Drunk shook his head. "I can't, Master, Gurren is a mage of light. Such a person could only become a low-level undead at most, and he will never be able to level up. Light magic is the opposite of black magic. The undead simply cannot have any properties of light. Zhao's face was bitter. The highest person in that army is Gurren. He may know the most secrets. If we can't find anything out from him, it seems like we'll have to look for our answers somewhere else. Drunk. Can you turn an ordinary warrior into a high-level undead? Drunk told him that it was possible, although he couldn't do it by himself. Combining his power with the other black mages might be able to get it done. Zhao then turned to Green and said, Grandpa Green, the Ji Shiling twin should be two people with a lot of influence. Should we also try to turn them into high-level undead? Before Green could answer, Drunk said, Master, turning a person into a high-level undead is not easy. Even with the strength of all 8 of us, at most we could change one person every decade. It's simply impossible to turn a lot of people into high-level undead. Zhao thought about it, then said, then let's forget it. We'll have to find some clues another way. Green nodded. Yes, I am upset that the enemy has looked down on us. I hope that this time we would be able to find out some clues. But Master, there is some good news. Miss Laura has sent a message through the Marquee Company, saying that she will return to Kosa City in 3 days. It is certain that she will come visit us. Zhao had a happy look on his face. Good, good. She is finally coming back. Just then, they all suddenly heard a voice. Brothers, I would like to thank you two for coming here with me to help. I heard that this black mage called Zhao has colluded with the immortal mercenary group on his way to Kosa City. Together, they have massacred several villages to deal with Miss Laura. Fortunately, she was rescued by a passing expert, otherwise she would have been in a lot of danger from these evil people. We must remove them as soon as possible. This is a good thing we're doing for the continent and the people. Green, Zhao, and everyone else looked stunned. Gurren was talking nonsense, and before he even finished, Zhao exhaled and almost shouted, shameless. I have never seen anyone so shameless. Instead of being rescuers, we have become the ones causing harm. He must have a thick skin if he could run his mouth off like that to justify himself. Green was also annoyed at what he heard. These light mages are used to being smug. They're just pretending to have good morals. It's disgusting. That guy is so annoying, Mrin said when she heard Gurren's words. Just then, one of the Ji Shiling twins said, Mr. Gurren is too kind. In the continent, you are notoriously known as a slayer of evil. To help you with this small favor brings honor to us two brothers. Brothers, you are too kind. Gurren smiled. I have only faced the immortal mercenary group once a few years ago. Back then, I was just a measly 6th level mage. Although I was able to injure them, they were able to run away. This time I'm hoping I will discover some clues on Zhao's body that will help me find the immortal mercenary group. The Ji Shiling twins were obviously interested in this topic. They started to ask what happened. Gurren smiled and talked about how he dealt with the immortal mercenary group when they first faced each other. Zhao, however, wasn't interested, so moved the image on the screen to the advanced warrior's tent. But he was disappointed. The 3 advanced warriors were doing nothing but sitting there, meditating. After a while, they still didn't do anything. Zhao wasn't able to find out anything from them. It seems like the identity of these 3 guys wasn't so simple. Zhao again switched the image on the screen, but this time into the command tent of the ordinary warrior. He was surprised to see the man sitting in the tent, frowning as he looked over a map. He didn't say a word. Zhao brought the screen closer and carefully looked over the map. As expected, it was a map of the rocky terrain around Stony Mountain. Green also looked at the map, and sighed. He then turned to Zhao. Master, I think it's useless to get drunk to turn this man into an advanced undead. He is just a mercenary, not part of Gurren's group. Zhao nodded. Then he brought the screen back to the 3 advanced warriors to see if he could find out anything at all. Carefully looking at them, he asked, Shift, do you really think that these 3 men seem familiar to you? Shift nodded. Yes, Master. I really feel that they're familiar. Chapter 99, Antidote. This chapter was sponsored by Garfield S. U.S. Thanks. Shift didn't know why, but he felt that these 3 advanced warriors felt very familiar. although he couldn't think of the reason. Looking at the camp, they didn't find anything unusual. Gurren was still talking with the Ji Shiling twins as if they already had their enemy within their grasp. At their current strength, it should be enough to deal with Zhao. After all, his identity was a black mage, and Gurren was a light mage at the 8th level. His power was the direct nemesis of black magic. They also didn't forget about Zhao's servants, which they found out about by searching for news about Lore's battle with the immortal mercenary group. Green should be at the same strength as their 3 advanced warriors. Even if they couldn't beat him, they should be able to hold their own with any problem, and the Ji Shiling twins could naturally deal with Murren. Because of this, Gurren was very confident that they would win. Zhao had been moving the image on the screen to look through the whole camp, but only Gurren's tent had something noteworthy. The others simply had nothing worth their attention. Zhao was waiting for the sun to go down before they could act. While they were waiting, all they could do was spy on the camp. But just as they started to think that trying to get any more information from watching Gurren was useless, suddenly they heard a voice. Report. All 3 mages faced the entrance to the tent. Come in, Gurren said. A black-clad assassin came in from outside. He handed a piece of paper to Gurren, but before Gurren could say anything, he turned and left the tent. The behavior of this man was rude. However, the strange thing was that Gurren didn't seem angry. All of these assassins truly belonged to the Purcell clan. Gurren told the Ji Shiling twins, I am merely here to help them remove this scourge from their territory. That was why that assassin acted in such a superior way. After all, I'm a good-natured person, otherwise I would have taught him a lesson. Gurren chucked before he continued. Since we're dealing with Zhao, the Purcell clan has provided us with a lot of help. They also calculated this very well. They gave us enough information and forces to fight against Zhao. But if somehow we are defeated, none of this could be traced back to their clan, so they don't have to fear any retaliation from Zhao the Black Mage. When Green heard what Gurren said, he couldn't help but burst out and say, it seems that this attack really is related to the Purcell clan. He had just finished speak when they heard Gurren's voice again. Sure enough, Zhao's advanced level warrior should get back to Stony Mountain by tomorrow. We can't do anything tonight. We'll have to wait until tomorrow before we could finish the job of wiping out Zhao and all of his servants. One of the Ji Shiling twins then spoke up. Oddly enough, I heard that Zhao's warrior went and bought so many blue-eyed rabbits. What do you think he needs them for? Gurren's brow wrinkled. He's an evil person, so perhaps he might want those rabbits to test a new poison. Green was sitting in front of the screen next to Zhao. It seems like Gurren's people didn't know that Green had already come back, so they were ready to rest for the night. Tomorrow was when they would make their move. After the tent went quiet, Zhao said, it seems that the reputations of black mages really isn't good on the continent. That guy even thinks that we're going to use the rabbits to test a new poison. However, it seems like he and his army will be resting tonight. It is the right time for us to act. Zhao laughed. The Grand Duke of the Purcell Duchy has given someone else the knife to kill us, but he doesn't know about my space, allowing us to listen in. Otherwise we wouldn't have found out the people behind Gurren. Green nodded. Since the territory of the Purcell clan is right next to the entrance to the Black Waste, they have always been a threat to us. Although we don't really need to worry about them because of the space, it's still a big hassle. We originally didn't have the power to solve our problems, but now that we have enough strength, we should go after the Purcell clan first. After listening to Green, Mren laughed. With Master's space, we don't need to worry. In just a few years' time, with the strength we can gain from the Carrion Swamp, we can take out the Purcell clan with one stroke and take over their duchy. Even if they were to find out about the improved situation of the Black Waste, how would they stop us? And do not forget, after a few decades, Blockhead, Rockhead, and Meg would have grown up. With their talent in cultivation, our Buddha clan would no longer need to be afraid of anyone. If we were to lose this battle, the only reason is because we didn't think that the Purcell clan would work so hard to build this army just to kill us. We have to prepare. We can't let them think it's so easy to take us down. Despite Mren's words, Zhao looked concerned. But if they were to find out about the Black Waste, then the nobility might unite against us. instead of just being attacked by one of the nobles. Even with our strength, wouldn't they be unstoppable? Green sneered. Master thinks too highly of those people. They're just a group of misers that care about nothing except for money. Even if they dare get together, we will attack them first. How do you think the old aristocracy was developed? You hit them until they recognize your strength. From what Green said, Zhao's eyes couldn't help but brighten. Then he laughed. Yes, what Grandpa Green says is right. It seems like my thoughts had been too pessimistic. Zhao had been pessimistic because he was an otaku in his past life. A characteristic of an otaku was that they were timid. In addition, from Adam's memories, he understood how great and powerful those nobles are. Subconsciously, this made him afraid when he found out that this army belonged to one of them. He didn't want to face those people who would just grow obsessed with his farm and think to themselves that they and their children would be able to move into his black waste. But from what Green said, it was like a window had opened up to let Zhao see another way. He would have preferred to get a little stronger before facing one of the nobles, but he had to admit that if he wanted to stand upright in this world, he had to get those people to recognize his strength. With this thought, Zhao couldn't help but say, if only I could find an antidote for the water of nothingness, then I would be able to get even stronger. The moment he said those words, the voice immediately came, to lift the host's genetic defect, you need to reach level 20. After opening the factory, it can be done. Zhao and everyone else in the villa heard what the voice said, but unlike Zhao, they didn't know what this sudden sentence meant. Even though they didn't know, the meaning of this sentence was very clear to Zhao. He would have never thought that the water of nothingness would give him genetic defects. No wonder he couldn't learn magic or martial arts. But to his delight, once he reached level 20, he would be able to open a factory inside his space, plus repair his defective genes. Zhao couldn't help but laugh. Everyone gave him a puzzled look. It was only when Zhao calmed down a little that Green asked, Master, what is the meaning of those words? And why are you laughing? Zhao might have been calm, but he was still smiling. I was just thinking about how to solve the water of nothingness's effect on my body, which resulted with what the spatial voice said. He paused at this point, but Green could see that he was still smiling. Green and Mrin weren't stupid. They felt slightly stunned as they began to guess what it could mean, causing them to stand up. Master, Zhao nodded. Ah, yes. Once the space reaches level 20, I will be able to solve the problem the water of nothingness did to my body. Green had a look on his face like he didn't believe Zhao. Master, you're not joking, right? It's not a joke. Zhao laughed. Green and Mrin were laughing as well. But it wasn't just them, but also Blockhead and Rockhead. They didn't expect that the space could also give a solution to the water of nothingness. If that's the case, then it was like their worries have disappeared. They had always been worried about what the water of nothingness did to Zhao's body. Because of it, at most Zhao would only be able to live for a few decades. So the space would only be able to exist for a few decades. But once Zhao had been cured, he would be able to learn magic and martial arts, thus increasing his natural lifespan. Chapter 100, Attack. Now that they heard there was a solution to the water of nothingness, they were certainly happy. At once, Green asked, Master, to level up the space like before, do we still need to find some special plants? Zhao nodded. It seems that's the fastest way to level up that I know of. Last time, Grandpa Green, you brought a lot of things that helped the space reach the 10th level, including some common things. But to reach an even higher level, I'm afraid it might not be as easy. Green made an ugly face. Then he said, we should focus on the development of the space and nothing else. Getting the space to reach level 20 should be our most important goal. Mrin nodded at what they were saying. Originally, they were trying to grow the space to help the Buddha clan make money. But this time it was different. Once the space became strong enough, it could provide a possible solution to the problem in Zhao's body. Nothing else mattered. Getting the cure to the water of nothingness was their top priority. Zhao didn't say anything. From just one look, he could tell what they were thinking. For them, his safety always came first. To be honest, he had no objections with that. He too would also like to get rid of the water of nothingness out of his body as fast as possible. so that he may have the chance to learn magic and martial arts. In his past life, with the rise of web novels, almost everyone had dreams of learning powerful martial arts or dazzling magic. They dreamed of crossing into a mysterious world and gaining these amazing abilities. But although Zhao crossed into another world, this body had drank the water of nothingness, so it was impossible for him to learn magic and martial arts. He could do nothing but feel sorry for himself. But now that there was a possible solution, Zhao of course felt very happy. After more than 2 hours, everyone's moods finally settled down, although there was still a slight look of excitement on their faces. By now the image on the screen had dimmed down. Gurren had lit a magic lamp and was still chatting with the people inside the tent, while outside, the mercenaries were busy cooking. Seeing what those mercenaries were doing, Mrin remembered that she should be cooking now, so she quickly got up to cook, while also getting Meg to arrange food for the slaves. After dinner, Zhao sent Shift out of the space with the ghost staff, and told him to find those assassins. Shift moved around the perimeter of the canyon. Fortunately, he was an undead with eyes made of soul fire, so the dark had no effect on him. He was able to find his way around. Not only that, but it could even be said that the darkness was an advantage to him. Those assassins appeared on the screen one by one. Apparently, they had been trained to guard in pairs, and all together they created a huge defense network around the camp. If someone wanted to sneak into the camp, they would be discovered. Eventually, he was able to find the positions of all 100 assassins. This took more than an hour, and by now most of the mercenaries had already fallen asleep. Even Gurren and the other 2 mages were resting. Only the 3 advanced warriors were sitting there, motionless. Looking at the 3 men, Green's face couldn't help but sink. He felt that these 3 were very murderous and were proficient in walking the assassin's road. Such people were the worst to deal with. Seeing nothing happening in the camp, Zhao turned to Green and said, "Grandpa Green, we have to rest. We won't make our move until the middle of the night. When they're sleeping like the dead, that would be the most appropriate time to attack." After taking a look at the camp, Green nodded. "Well, then let's go rest." Having stood up along with Mrin and everyone else, Zhao called back Shift and told him to watch the screen in the living room. If anything were to happen, or if it was midnight and he wasn't up yet, he should call him immediately. After that, Zhao went to his room. Lying in bed, Zhao couldn't sleep. Today, the space had given him such a surprise. There was hope that he might be able to learn magic and martial arts, which made Zhao feel excited. While in bed, thoughts of what he could learn kept turning in his head, until he unknowingly fell asleep. Zhao was sleeping when suddenly he was woken by the tone chiming and the voice telling him that the radishes have matured. He looked at the time. It wasn't that late, so he got out of bed and harvested the radishes. By the time he returned to the living room, it was already 11 o'clock at night. Green was still up. He was sitting in the living room, staring at the screen. Although it was a little dark, they could still see the situation in the camp. With the magic of the screen, no matter how dark it was outside, they would always be able to see within a range of 500 meters in diameter. When Green saw Zhao come in, he said, "Master, it's late enough. I think now is the time to act." Zhao nodded. He turned around and saw a crowd waiting for his instructions. "Shift, you will get out now and dive into the mage's tent. Remember, your only goal is Gurren. You don't need to care about anyone else." Shift saluted. Then Zhao turned to some of the other black mages. "Scales, Brick, you will bring out 500 undead to the perimeter of the canyon to deal with those assassins. Do not let them run away." Scales and Brick also saluted. Zhao then turned to Green. "Grandpa Green, I'll leave the enemies inside the camp for you to figure out." Green nodded. "Your undead and the other 6 black mages should mainly deal with the Jishiling twins. With its spiritual attack, it shouldn't be difficult to fight against them. And the remaining 3 advanced warriors should be handled by Mrin. As for you, Master, you should wait here and not leave the space." Zhao had no objections. His mental age was more than 30 years old, so naturally he was no longer an impulsive young man. He knew that if he left the space, he would be killed. When Green saw Zhao agree to not go out, he felt a little relieved. He had been afraid that Zhao would want to participate in this battle. Green then turned to Blockhead and Rockhead. as well as Meg, and said, "The three of you will also fight. If you want to become a powerful warrior or mage, constant battles is needed to help you slowly grow up. Tonight is a good opportunity, but you have to be careful." The three of them nodded. After he was done, Green turned to Zhao. "Master, we are ready." Zhao nodded. Then he sent out Shift. After that, he sent out Green and everyone else, including his army of undead, to several points that they had marked out. It was one of Zhao's new capabilities that he had discovered. As long as it was within his monitoring range of 500 meters in diameter, when he sent someone out, he could freely choose the spot where he could send them. This was very convenient for their attack strategy. Shift appeared in the camp, and was moving around with invisibility. Zhao was only able to see him because of the red dot on the screen. Invisibility wasn't necessarily an ability that could only be done with magic. A special trained assassin could also learn invisibility. But although invisibility seemed very magical, in general, advanced level mages and warriors didn't care about it. Even if invisibility could hide your body, you wouldn't be able to get close to an advanced mage or warrior because they would still be able to sense your magical or martial arts energy fluctuations. Still, a very well-trained assassin could hide their breath to the point where it would be very difficult for an advanced mage to find them. Shift acted immediately as he dived into the mage's tent.